Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushal Mehra. Today is episode 6 of the Shastrartha. Today's topic is revisiting the idea of India, the CAA NRC Conundrum. Now, I'll explain a bit of the background of why we decided to talk about this. If you are someone who watches news in India, that means you're not like me. So you must be watching the news channels. You're used to listening to this word being bandied about all the time, that people keep saying, oh, this is not the idea of India. The idea of India stands for this. The idea of India stands for that. And if ever these words were used, was when the last year the current government actually tried to pass the legislation, which is called, at first it was called the CAB, and then it later on became a CAA, and obviously led to a series of protests around India, a lot of debate around India. So I was like, you can use the CAA NRC conundrum as an example, and then we can discuss the larger discussion on what is the idea of India itself. Because if you ask me personally, I think CAA NRC and the discussion around it actually touches the heart of the so-called idea of India that is propounded by a certain section of Indian intelligentsia. Now, just for the record, in case you're wondering, Kushal, how can you have a discussion about this and not have somebody from the left in this? I just want to state it for record that I did try to get someone from the left desperately, but I did not succeed. But that doesn't mean there will not be a left-wing voice on the discussion. I will be playing that role today. So all your abuses, all your hatred, all the trolling can be directed to me, just for the fact that because we need three voices in this, because definitely Sai Deepak had a unique voice when it came to CAA NRC, and today we have and we are not related, for the record. Today we have Nikhil Mehra, on the podcast. Just before somebody asks, "Kya aap bhai hain?" Nahi, we are not related, but there can be Mehras who are not related. So Nikhil also had a very unique perspective when it came to the CAA NRC, and both are very good friends and very knowledgeable people. So I was like, okay, these two can obviously have their say, but we still needed a proper left-wing narrative. So this is how we are going to start today's series. You know how Shastrartha happens. Everybody has opening remarks of around 10 to 15 minutes, and then we respond to each other's remarks, and then we have the audience questions in the last half an hour of the discussion. Now today, because we don't have a left-wing voice, so guess what? I'm going to start with the left-wing voice. So I'm going to be playing the role of the left-wing guy, and I'm not going to do a steelman on anything. So what I did was I read like 15, 16 articles, op-eds, papers, and then I stuck onto these 2 pages, and I'll be that transparent that I'll even share the page with you, and I'll literally read off the page. And I think that is a pretty good summary of at least their objection against the CAA, because to me the idea of India and the debate between the idea of India at its heart is actually something to do with the CAA more and the NRC less, because we need to talk about the objections to the CAA. So I'm going to start with a very basic screen share. So I'm going to share 2 screens with you guys so that you guys know what the left-wing argument is. So to begin with, I'm going to start with this article that came on cjp.org.in. So what do they say? Why is CAA considered discriminatory? So let's go through all the points over here. The CAA gives eligibility to for Indian citizenship to illegal immigrants who are Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, Christians, that is non-Muslims, from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, who reached India before 2015. CAA ignores persecuted minorities from other regions such as Tibet, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, as well as Hazaras, Ahmadis, atheists, and political dissenters who face persecution in Pakistan. This act is the first instance of religion being used as a criterion for Indian citizenship. CAA violates the constitutional secular principles and is a violation of Articles 13, 14, 15, and 16 and 21, which guarantee the right to equality before the law and non-discriminatory treatment by the Indian state. CAA is about illegal immigrants. Now, this is a very important point. They are talking about it. Citizenship via naturalization or registration is not available to illegal immigrants. There is no way for a Muslim who is declared an illegal immigrant to get citizenship in India. Indian Muslims could be badly affected by CAA plus NRC because those Muslims who do not have the documents required to prove their citizenship in a nationwide NRC could be declared as illegal immigrants, and they would not be able to use CAA like non-Muslim Indians perhaps could to get citizenship by lying and claiming that they are illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Now, this was not enough. I still have one more argument to share. Now, I'm going to I'm going to do one more thing. So there was one more article that was, at least when I read the entire Pantheon, I found it to be very interesting, and that was written by Badri Raina. So Badri Raina wrote this article, and I'm going to share that article now. And I hope that you're as triggered as I wish you are when you read this or when you hear this. So this is the article by Badri Raina, and I'm doing this because I have to do the job of presenting the left-wing argument. So the article was why the CAA is more lethal than a projected NRC. So I'm just going to read the key points over here in the article. The article says the supporters of the CAA, who include some apparently well-meaning non-Hindutva Indians, argue that, after all, the implementation of the CAA will have no bearing on those who already are Indian citizens. So why the hue and cry? Well, here's why. In according not just refugee status, we can leave the brackets apart, but citizenship to individuals from designated religious communities to the exclusion of one religion, the Indian state would have for the first time adopted a non-secular principle of citizenship. And I want to add here the emphasis on the non-secular principle of citizenship, because they harp on that a lot, the left. The simple point is that once admitted into India, the ostensibly persecuted would stand to become citizens not only on any existing constitutional parameters, but on religious considerations. Thus, whereas the disingenuous argument that no existing citizen may be affected by this new law may be true, in fact, something much more heinous would have happened to the character of the state itself in subverting the secular constitution within which existing citizenship finds validity. Some 200 million Indian citizens would have been told that their religion is somehow at the heart of the persecution that is sought to be rectified, since such new recruits to citizenship will come exclusively from 3 designated Islamic states. This move would then nicely gel with the Hindutva narrative. Again, I want to add emphasis over here, the Hindutva narrative, that only Muslims have persecuted Indians through what the Hindutva historians dub Muslim rule in India. In this Jungian recourse to a manufactured collective unconscious, the record of persecutions engaged in our history by non-Muslim rulers would stand relegated to oblivion. This insidious line of thinking is buttressed by the concomitant fact that persecuted Hindus in Sri Lanka, or persecuted Christians in Bhutan, or Madheshis in Nepal, or Rohingya in Myanmar are not a part of the CAA, suggestive of the Hindutva dogma that non-Muslim states cannot be religious persecutors. How, perish the thought, can Buddhists in Sri Lanka and Myanmar or fellow Hindus in Nepal, after all, be regarded as capable of persecuting anyone on religious grounds? The seemingly innocuous, compassionate CAA then is a thin end of a wedge that seeks to demarcate one religion as a persecutor and exclude other religions from such predilections. It is thus not hard to imagine how an ideological stance of this sort would not but impact the collective psyche of Indian Muslims, whose citizenship may well not be affected by the CAA, but whose self-perception would not be severely debilitated as a class, if you like, by misreading of history and contemporary realities. The CAA then has the effect of putting one isolated religion in the doghouse, not just in the 3 designated countries, but on a far larger ambit of reference that inevitably includes Islam in India as well. Since the Hindutva forces seek pointedly to locate the CAA within a revived memory of partition, the new law has the potential to propagate the view that atrocities were then committed only by Muslims or non-Muslims, a position that runs patently foul of the tragic bipartisan character of that unconscionable episode in the life of the subcontinent. Now, this, I think, is a pretty healthy summary. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you're a left-winger who watches this, and you can say, oh, Kushal, you have misrepresented the point. My only answer to you would be, I reached out, but nobody wanted to come. So it's not my fault. I did the best I could, and this is the left wing argument. So now let's start with the first guest today. So Sai, now you had a distinct view, obviously, where you were clearly saying that the CAA NRC have per se no issues from the point of view of constitutionality or from the level of a civilizational perspective. So Sai, I request you to present your argument first.
So how much time do I have, Kushal?
Oops, I think Sai has accidentally left the discussion. He left the page. I'm very sorry about it.
It's been happening a bit on and off, huh? So we might have problems because he's...
No, it's okay.
Even when you were
back
reading out...
Yeah, it's okay. That's okay. We'll manage it. I'll get him back. Don't worry, guys. Let me get him back. All right. Let's get him back. In the meantime, okay, Nikhil. Then let's start with you. I'll try to get Sai back in the meantime because we can't do anything. So how about this? Why don't you start with your argument? So you obviously had a different take where you were like the CAA is not a problem, but you have a huge problem with the NRC per se, right? So Nikhil, how about we do this? You at least start with your side of the problem because we are live right now. So people need to hear your point.
Sure.
So in the meantime, I'll get Sai back.
Me.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thank you first up for having me. And look, the way you describe my position is a bit simplistic. What I have always said is that the CAA as it stands, were it to be a standalone law, I don't think anybody can have any legal, moral or ethical objection to it because it is one of those very rare laws where Parliament has passed an act taking into consideration realities that exist outside of the domain of the territory of India. It actually takes into account the realities that have existed in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and in Bangladesh. And to that end, details that there has been mass-scale persecution on account of a state-sanctioned religion. So there are three elements to the CAA. One, you have to belong to those 6 communities, to those 6 religions, if you want accelerated citizenship. 2, you have to have entered India before 2004, 31st December 2014. The basis of that cutoff date, to be perfectly honest, I have not seen any good reasoning for it. And 3, and let's be very clear and importantly clear about this, there is no actual exclusion in the CAA for Muslims coming into India. It is just that the citizenship that is accorded to the other 6 communities is accelerated under the CAA, and for Muslims it is not. Now, here is a little bit of magic to the date that was picked. Sai, now that you're back, the way we went forward is that I'm going forward first, and then we can proceed. Right. So there's a little bit of interesting element to the date. Now, the date chosen as a cutoff date in the CAA is 31st December 2014. And it is passed on 12th December 2019 and brought into effect around 31st December 2019 with a 5-year period for citizenship. So ostensibly, anybody who is a Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, Jain or Parsi who entered into India from those 3 designated countries, by the cutoff date provided in the Act, could be given citizenship immediately. Ostensibly, you could be given citizenship immediately under the CAA. So maybe that was part of the thinking behind 31st December 2014. So, like I said, I have no objections whatsoever to the CAA as it stands, and I see no problems with it. Because to me, there is the persons coming in from outside who may be illegal immigrants, who may be belonging to the Muslim community, do not actually have any fundamental rights that they can enforce. Those who are within India can certainly raise a challenge under Article 14. They cannot, to go back to one of the slides that you had shown, they cannot raise a challenge under Article 15 because that challenge is limited only to citizens. They may raise a challenge under Article 21 and they cannot raise any challenges under Article 19 because those are also limited to citizens. So the nature of the challenge is a very different kind of challenge. And in my experience, whatever I've seen of the various petitions filed, despite the fact that we have given these trauma arguments, that similarly, Ahmadiyas are persecuted in Pakistan and so on and so forth. I haven't actually seen a petition filed in the Supreme Court by an Ahmadiyya. I haven't seen too many petitions, in fact, filed by anybody who is a immigrant. It is generally being filed by lawyers in public interest or by persons of repute in public interest. So I don't know whose cause they're espousing in a real sense, because in these kinds of cases, in my view, if you're being strictly going by the letter of the law, locus standi of the person questioning the provision actually matters quite substantially. In any event, when you look at the CAA, I would therefore not be asserting rights necessarily on behalf of persons who are illegal immigrants into India. But I do certainly have a problem if the CAA plus NRC combination creates a problem for Muslims who have been residents of India and therefore citizens of India for a prolonged period of time. Let's understand something. Today, you are a citizen of India only because you think you are a citizen of India, only because you think you satisfy certain requirements of the Citizenship Act, which have varied over time. From 1950 to 1987, the mere fact that you were born in India was sufficient. From 87 to 2003, not only did you have to be born in India, but at least one parent had to be a citizen of India, which means that parent would have also had to be born in India or would have had to satisfy the citizenship requirements of Article 5, 6, and 7 in some way. And post 2003, not only would you have to be born in India to an Indian citizen parent, but your second parent could not be an illegal immigrant. Right? So you have all of these definitional terms, but nobody in the state comes forward and certifies that you, Mr. Kushal Mehra, or you, Mr. Sai Deepak, or you, Mr. Nikhil Mehra, satisfied these conditions. And therefore, you are in fact a citizen of India. So citizenship, thus far, until the NRC arrives, has been effectively a self-declaratory system. And if the state finds the odd person here or there who is not in fact a citizen, they may oust them. And on that basis, we find that the state, in fact, even in the Aadhaar judgment, made various submissions saying, look, anybody can get a ration card, anybody can get a driver's license, anybody can get land papers, so on and so forth, right? So those were not sufficient for them to say these are good identity markers for the state to work with to know who is who in this country. So that was one of the issues in Aadhaar. And therefore, Aadhaar was so important. Now that Aadhaar has come, now Aadhaar is not good enough under the NRC. So the problem that the NRC now creates is, for the first time, nobody is a citizen but can be made into a citizen. That is, all of us can be granted citizen status by way of a document certifying that we are in fact citizens. And so therefore, all of us start from the same position, but some of us become more privileged than others, because under the CAA, some of us get citizenship automatically and others do not. And what the CAA does, therefore, is create this arbitrage in combination with the NRC. Now, the NRC, one of the arguments that you get in relation to the NRC is that it is not actually in place. And that's a misnomer of sorts. And I'd like to explain this. We need to first distinguish, and this is sort of first principles of law, between an act passed by Parliament, where both houses of Parliament have to sign off on it, vote on it, and a majority has to accept it, and then a legislation becomes an act of law, under which certain rules can be passed, which rules are passed by the government. They are not passed by Parliament. There is no public scrutiny. Those rules are passed by government, and they are, frankly, open to bureaucratic whim. And this happens quite often. There is such a set of rules under the Citizenship Act, which is the Citizenship Rules 2003, that set up different concepts. There is a census, there is a national population register, and then there is a national register of citizens. Three different concepts, overlapping but distinct. A census is literally just a head count. It doesn't care whether you are from this country, born here, not born here. It's immaterial to it. It wants to just know how many people there are in this country. National Population Register is a register that is set up under Rule 3 and 4 of the Citizenship Rules 2003, which requires for certain specific questions to be answered. And one of the questions that is being asked now is the place of birth of your parents, place and date of birth of your parents. And why is this being done? Because I want to allude back to the Citizenship Amendment Act, to the Citizenship Act that existed in place from up to 87, where only birth was the basis. From 87 to 2003, where birth plus parental birth being in India was the basis. And then from 2003 onwards, where birth plus parental birth plus the other being a non-illegal migrant becomes the basis. So there is In that sense, the information required for the process of the NRC is anyway being collected. And it is only a matter of ministerial movement for the state to come around and say, okay, we've got this data, based on this, we are going to form an NRC. So this idea that the NRC doesn't exist today is not something that works with me, to be perfectly honest, because to my mind, the architecture of the law is complete. The NRC is in place. You may or may not enforce it. That is a part and parcel of lawmaking in this country. You can pass a law which, for example, has a provision within its own terms that says the law will come into force as and when issued into the as and when a notification to that effect is passed by the requisite authority, and that authority is generally a part of the local government or of the central government or someone or the other. And you may have laws that sit in suspension for a substantial period of time before they're ever enacted, but the architecture of the law stays, and so therefore it is a part of the statute book. So today, as far as I'm concerned, the NRC is a part of the statute book. So this idea that there is no discussion on the NRC, that there is no NRC in place, this doesn't sit with me, right? So the real conundrum that arises because of the NRC and the CAA in combination, and this is purely a legalistic argument, is there are two or three clean assumptions to be made. The first assumption to be made is an overwhelming majority of Hindus in this country have either come from India, or have come from Pakistan, or have come from Bangladesh, and a smattering may have come from Afghanistan. And very, very few, if any, have come from other countries who are citizens of other countries and then have come to India. So essentially, all of them will fit within the framework of the CAA. Of course, there is a timing differentiation. Some may have come after 2014. That will be a much smaller number. But a majority of them are before 2014. And so the backward-looking date becomes an important element. If the CAA, for example, were a legislation that said, we recognize that there is persecution of these communities, which there is, in fact, and these are reports we see every day, and therefore we have a humanitarian law that we passed for minorities in this country, and therefore was an open-ended law. It didn't need to have a cutoff date. Why should a person who's being persecuted in the same line in 2018, 19, 20 be differently treated from a person in the eyes of the Indian state from a person who was treated that way in 2010, 11, 12, 13? There's no good reason for it. If it were an open-ended law and you didn't have an NRC, I think this would be a law that, and it still is in certain senses, a law that upholds the greatest humanitarian traditions that this nation and this civilization have always been known for. We have been open-armed for those who are persecuted. The problem, of course, is that when the NRC kicks in, then the backward-looking date actually creates problems for almost every Muslim in India. And I'll tell you why. Can I share screen, Kushal?
Yeah, you can. You shared the screen. I'll allow it on the screen. Sure.
Okay, one second. What I want to do is show you this. Sorry. I have.
Bottom mein hoega, dekh, share screen, and then it. But it's not popping up. I can't share the screen unless I don't see it on my side. Nope, I'm not seeing it. Anyways, to read karke argument.
You cannot see it still?
Not a problem at all.
Okay, all right. So let me just read it out.
No, I can't see it. So you're not.
There is a rule within those rules that are the citizenship rules that I had described, which is rule 4 subclause. For subclause 4. During the verification process, particulars of such individuals whose citizenship is doubtful. Sorry, first for subclause 3.
Kya ho gaya?
No, 1 second. I just want to be clear on which. During the verification process, particulars of such individuals whose citizenship is doubtful shall be entered into the local registrar. Shall be entered by the local registrar with appropriate remark in the population register for further inquiry. And in case of doubtful citizenship, the individual of the family shall be informed in a specified pro forma immediately after the verification process is over. Every person, and this is very important, every person or family specified in sub-rule 4 shall be given an opportunity of being heard by the sub-district or taluk registrar of the citizenship of the citizen registration before a final decision is taken to include or exclude their particulars. Why I read this out is that you already have have a system of doubtful citizens that is already in place. These rules are already in place. So the moment you have an NPR, you collect information. In the course of the collection of that information, you determine that certain people here are doubtful citizens, and you start issuing to them. Because of the CAA, there will be a negligible number of Hindus that get caught in that, and it will, or any other community of the 6 that were described, and it will essentially be Muslims that are caught in it. So what you've set up is necessarily a communal citizenship test where only Muslims have to come and establish their citizenship. Now, it may very well be that they come forward and they have certain documents and they show it, and that's fine. But there is a substantial problem under Article 14 when, based on religion, one community has to go through a process while the other community does not. Right? Now, there are certain very insidious provisions in all of this. I want to, again, go back and read. Note that when I had read out that you can be a doubtful citizen, the section said every person so affected by this order. So every person who is called a doubtful citizen has the right to be heard before their name is actually put in to the register as a doubtful citizen. Now, there is another provision which says any person agreed by the order of a sub-district or taluk registrar under sub-rule 5. Now, the order under sub-rule 5 is you will set up a draft register of citizens for that area. So any person aggrieved by the order of taluk registrar may prefer an appeal in 30 days. You see the distinction between the uses of the phrase every person aggrieved by an order in the first rule and then any person aggrieved. Any person is an extremely broad phrase. It may very well be that your neighbors are allowed to complain against you and say, oh no, this person is definitely an illegal immigrant. And this becomes cause settling. It becomes a way to divide society. So the way these rules are structured does pose, to my mind, a substantial problem because of the NRC. If you were to take the NRC out and say, we don't want to have a citizenship register, we've got enough information on Aadhaar, and based on that, we are going to start looking at people who may have falsified information, I don't have so much of a problem with that, because it is an undeniable fact that a vast majority of illegal immigrants into this country will inevitably be Muslims because we are surrounded by 2 highly populous Muslim nations. And mostly these illegal immigrants will likely be Bangladeshi. So that statistical fact I don't have so much of a problem with. Right? But this interplay between Citizenship Amendment Act on the one side, Citizenship Act on the other side, it's altering definitions, then the census, then the National Population Register, and then the NRC. It makes quite a complex set of readings. But in the net, in my opinion, the effect is that a citizenship test based on religion is set up, which I find abhorrent, not just under the constitution, but I find morally abhorrent. And I find that against the best traditions of Hinduism as well, of Sanatana Dharma, as I have followed it. I mean, there may be other views within the same Sanatana Dharma, but to my best knowledge, this completely militates against what we've always stood for. I think as of now, these are my submissions, and let's see if we can come back again.
All right. So, Sai, and you have enough time. Don't bother about the time. You know, Cārvāka podcast mein time ka kabhi issue nahi hota hai. So, now share your views. And by the way, Sai, I have to give you compliments. Everybody's like, Sai Deepak sir is looking dapper and he's lost a lot of weight apparently. So, everybody's praising you.
Okay. I mean, thanks to everyone who's actually complimenting my so-called looks or whatever it is. I think it's more by necessity. I've had to do it. I have no other option. I was on the wrong side of 100. I've come to the right side of 80. So I'm fine. So, so hopefully on the 15th of August, by the 15th of August, I lose another 3 kilos and I should declare my independence from fat of 20 kilos. So that should be it.
Yes.
Now, first of all, let me actually thank Nikhil for actually participating in this discussion, because I've long wanted to hear his views on this particular topic. I've followed his tweets on this particular issue as someone who I believe is a scintillating litigator. I've seen him in action in the High Court as well, and I've seen how he carries himself. I've never had the pleasure of actually talking to him in person. This is the first time I think we are talking to each other, apart from the phone call that we have had. So it's great to be on a panel with him. Second, I've always believed that Kushal is a closet left-winger, and he's finally come out of the closet. Okay, by giving himself this particular space, by creating a justification. I've always believed he's been a mole in our soul. Okay, so then he comes out. Okay, so now he's only saying, "नहीं नहीं अब मैं क्या करूं, मैंने बुलाया, किसको पता किसको बुलाया, किसने ना कहा, we don't know. We only have to go by his word." Okay, so I think he is finally said, liberate कर लेते हैं अब. Now I'll prove all these Sanghi people who and what I truly am. Okay, so he's come out. So coming to the topic, the one thing that I think Nikhil and I frankly agree on, and I say this in a very complimentary way, is that both of us fortunately believe that there is something called as the Indian civilization, and we don't negate its existence. Okay, so there I think is a commonality which I'd like to certainly build on. So I have two layers of arguments, or perhaps three layers of arguments. One is civilizational, therefore I have to necessarily take into account history. Two is the legal. The moral is perhaps the most subjective, therefore I leave it to the end. Okay. So on the civilization and the historic aspect, I strongly disagree with anyone who believes that the CAA and the NRC must not be located within the four corners of the history of the partition which ravaged the subcontinent. And anybody who believes that we must completely unshackle ourselves from that particular history and jettison that part of history and junk it into the dustbin is turning a blind eye to its continuing effects and the continuing mindset in our neighboring countries, in our immediate neighborhood, and which is the impact of which the other non-Muslim minorities are bearing in these countries. Okay, so the two-nation theory and the mindset which dominated and which pushed that particular theory, which resulted in creating this creature called Pakistan, and therefore erstwhile East Pakistan and today Bangladesh, and which subsequently spilled over into Afghanistan as well, according to me, is single-handedly responsible for the situations that have necessitated the creation of a CAA. That's a fact. Okay. Now, has it necessitated the creation of an NRC as well? I would dare say yes, because I believe that NRC is certainly one of the tools which was conceived of as a tool of dealing with illegal migration to some extent, to a limited extent. And the illegal migration which is taking place within India from our neighbors is not a consequence of the fact that they are a populous country. They're not able to contain their population within their borders, and that's the reason that they come running to this country for greener pastures, economically and otherwise. I do believe that there is a very clear design at play. I have said this bluntly and openly at the debate at Nalsar, saying that there are enough sources, there is enough literature authored by people who have served in those areas from the security apparatus to specifically say that you will be making the mistake of assuming that this entire thing is about economics, or this is entirely about land grabbing in the way that Hitler wanted to grab land. Hitler wanted to grab land for a different reason, and here also land grabbing is happening for a different reason. And there is an unfinished business as far as the concept of Greater Bangladesh and the idea of Greater Bangladesh is concerned. So the Northeast is effectively directly in the crosshairs of that particular ideology. And there is enough literature to support this, literature coming from non-partisan people who have served in, let's say, in those areas as part of the police or as part of the other security agencies, have written over and over about this. So I do believe that civilizationally, given the specific backdrop of the partition, where a specific mindset resulted in the loss of lives of millions of people and serious loss of territory to this particular civilization, territory which belongs to this particular civilization, India would effectively be myopic, and it would be short-sighted and ahistoric in its conduct if it does not bear in mind these, let's say, historical realities which are not too far in the past, and in order for it to protect the homeland of this particular civilization and its adherents. So that is my response at the civilizational level. Just as I think it's important for us to keep our doors open to those people who don't mean ill to, let's say, to our civilization, we must equally be cognizant of those people who bear a clear animus which they wear on their sleeve. And here, the most important thing that I think we must be cognizant of is that you need to strike a distinction between individual migration and group migration. Okay? And there is enough scholarly literature on this particular issue to say when an individual approaches, and that individual approaches because he wants a better economic opportunity, perhaps the state can be much more lenient in examining that person's intentions. But if a clear pattern emerges where people start coming in droves, or they start coming in certain numbers, it's important to understand what is the intent behind it? Are they being pushed or through a specific intent, or is it voluntary, or whatever may be the cause? It's important to take cognizance of it. And that's precisely the question that I think Europe was asking itself in the backdrop of the vast hordes of people who spilled over into Europe thanks to the civil war in Syria and other places. So group migration has very tangible consequences for demographics, for identity, for policy, for internal security, for religious composition, and a host of other things. Therefore, regardless of whichever group it may be, it is important to understand what is their intent and what is pushing them or what is pulling them into this country. So recently, if you see, there was a news report which basically said that several Christians or even Muslims in Afghanistan and Pakistan were deliberately converting themselves to Christians for the purposes of gaining access to India. Now, we don't know what is the true intent. Do they wish to come to India because they wish to escape that hellhole called Pakistan? Or do they wish to come to India because that hellhole wants to create another hellhole in India? Okay. Now, these are questions that I think the MHA must have answers to, and they should ask themselves, how do they wish to verify the religious identity of people who claim to be persecuted minorities and who wish to come to India? How do you hope to look at all these aspects? Now, this takes me into a different issue altogether, which is the second limb of my argument. So having set out my principled position on civilizational issues, where I believe that India is justified in doing so in the interest of its civilizational identity and to protect those people who have belonged to its civilization, and by that I mean those identities which originate within what is traditionally known as the subcontinent of Bharat. Not people who've just been born here. It's not just on the basis of birth, it's on the basis of what is the locus of your identity, where is the locus of the object of your fealty, loyalty, and allegiance. If it is within the subcontinent of Bharat, you're part of the civilization. But if it's outside, you may be born here, but civilization, you subscribe to something else. That's my position. So I'm willing to take that issue head on. The second question that I think that we need to address is the question of what has been happening all these years in terms of verification. This is where it's important to actually understand the ground realities of what's been going on. So most of the time what has happened is that Hindus who've been persecuted in Bangladesh or especially in Pakistan have come to India on the basis of the Tirth visa, Tirth Yatra visa. Okay, so they get invitations from their relatives here, they come here and बोरिया बिस्तर समेट के वहां से भाग के चले आते हैं, and they don't leave this country at all because that's their access point and that's their entry option into India, because they can't otherwise just run into India to say that we are being persecuted because they've not had enough mechanisms to address that particular situation so far. While there are some cases where people have just run saying that yes, we are being persecuted, therefore we want asylum in this country, there are the maximum number of cases are those where they're legitimately called to India and they don't go back at all. Now then what happens is, what is it that the government authorities at the border as well as subsequently look at? If you have, let's say, any document, including a ration card or anything that has been issued by the government of Pakistan, the authorities try and verify if it's a forged document, and even if it's an expired document, but it was valid at some point of time, then the fact that these people are of Pakistani origin and of Hindu faith, or let's say non-Muslim faith, is established and it's verified. And on that basis, they get access into India, they get asylum in India. That's the practice that's been followed. The one organization that has actually been doing scintillating work and with whom I have had the opportunity to discuss these issues at a practical level is Nimittakam, run by Sri Jaya Ahuja and Omendra Ratnu, and who have been playing a fantastic role in actually bringing all the Hindus, and at least 90% of them happen to be the scheduled caste coming from the Namashudra category or the Shudra category, as they call themselves. That is the language that they introduce themselves, in fact. So the reason I'm making this very, very clear is because there's a Twitter war going on caste-related issues. So I don't wish to be dragged into that particular issue for using a certain term. These are terms used even by these people in representing themselves, and these are terms used even by Sri Prakash Karat in his letter dated 22nd or 20th of June 2012, when he wrote to Sri Manmohan Singh, saying this is the caste composition of the people coming from Bangladesh who are persecuted, so on and so forth. He uses the word Namashudra to in fact represent those people and to identify their caste identity as well. So so especially for people who come from the fire brave category, I have no animus towards anyone. I'm merely identifying the name given by people in their certificates. Second, what happens is, therefore, you have a documented procedure which has been followed all these years to verify the antecedents of these people, whether they are truly of Pakistani origin or Bangladeshi origin or not. Okay. And here's the thing that hasn't happened so far. CAA has come, but the rules with respect to the CAA have not yet been notified. And from what I understand, it is pending at the MHA as well as the MLJ for clearance. Okay. Now, why is this important? Is this some obscure technicality that I'm using to effectively draw attention away from this entire argument? No. The rules for the purposes of implementation of the CAA are yet to come into existence. In fact, according to me, they should perhaps open it for some kind of town hall, just as they do with respect to other policies, where people have an opportunity to share their comments. Stakeholders must have an opportunity to comment on that particular issue. And since you're inviting people into this particular country, I believe that every member of this country has a right to comment and share their views with respect to the rules that are sought to be implemented. Now, in the absence of rules, what exactly happens? And this is where I think there is a point of departure with what Nikhilji has pointed out. I don't believe, and it is my professional, considered legal opinion, just as it is his, that people who qualify for as people falling within those 6 persecuted communities coming from those 3 Islamic Republic states automatically become citizens. They do not automatically become citizens. In this regard, what is important is that it specifically, the CAA specifically speaks of certain conditions being satisfied with respect to their antecedents, and those conditions will be notified in the rules, and the rules are yet to come out. So here's what has happened. Citizenship Act में illegal migrant का definition है. There is a definition. Okay. And these 6 communities coming from these 3 states have been granted an exemption from that particular definition by carving out a proviso to basically say these people shall not be treated as illegal migrants for the purposes of the Citizenship Act, where there exists a definition for an illegal migrant. Why is this important? There is no definition of a refugee under any of these legislations. We do not have a refugee law. Therefore, the only categories of people who we recognize are foreigners, illegal migrants, and citizens. Okay? Citizens are people who satisfy the requirements either under the Constitution or under the Citizenship Act. Foreigners are people who are not illegal migrants or citizens, but who enter this particular country with a foreign document and with a valid visa. Illegal migrants are those people who have overstayed their welcome and whose valid documents have expired, or who have entered this country at the outset with invalid documents or have no documents at all to support their claim to enter India. These are the only 3 categories. तो रेफ्यूजी का कोई परिभाषा नहीं है, उसकी कोई परिभाषा कहीं पे भी किसी भी अधिनियम के तहत नहीं. So what happens when somebody enters without a valid document from Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan? He qualifies under only one category. He's not a citizen and he's not a foreigner. Therefore, he's an illegal migrant. Okay. Second, वो तीर्थ यात्रा के वीजा के बेसिस पे अगर आ जाते हैं और यहाँ पे रह जाते हैं, then they overstay their welcome after the expiry of the visa. Therefore, again, they fall within the category of illegal migrants. Okay. Which is why a proviso has been created under the definition to illegal migrant into the Citizenship Act to ensure that these people at some stage fall outside the scope of illegal migrant and do not have any proceedings initiated against them for illegal migration, because then immediately it results in deportation proceedings under the Foreigners Act or any other legislation or any other process or mechanism. Okay. Now, the existence of a definition where you've been given a specific status and you've been granted immunity from the definition of illegal migrant is not automatic. It's not sufficient for you to be just a Hindu, Parsi, Buddhist, Jain, or any of these 6 communities from these 3 states for you to immediately attract that particular exemption, because the satisfaction of that particular requirement or the definition is subject to requirements which have been spelled out in the CAA and are yet to be spelled out in the rules, which are yet to be notified. Okay. So once you satisfy those rules, which are yet to be notified, 2 things will happen. जो पेंडिंग प्रोसीडिंग्स और कार्रवाई आपके खिलाफ है with respect to illegal migration under any legislation, those proceedings shall stand abated, which means you shall not be treated as an illegal migrant anymore because you have satisfied the definition of the proviso to illegal migrant. Okay. And 2, if no such proceeding is pending against you, no such proceeding will be initiated against you. That's point number 2. Okay. So the first response to one of the things that Nikhilji submitted is that there is no concept of immediate citizenship even under the CAA. And why is it that I'm able to say this is because this was the very subject of a specific debate where there was another set of fellows from, I think, one of these, I don't know which of these institutions, a foreign think tank, which focuses on demographics, on migration studies, and on illegal migration and these kind of patterns. That's what they were discussing. So I was asked to share these views. And the scholar who represented the opposite point of view made the exact point that they get immediate citizenship because there is a definition provided for these people, or they have been exempted from the definition of illegal migrants. I said a definition clause can never immediately give effect to anything unless and until you satisfy the requirements in the rest of the act. And here those requirements are that you have to satisfy the requirements which the rules will spell out once the MHA comes out with those rules. So first of all, assuming that there are even 1 million people or 10 million people or even 33,000 people or 40,000 people, not one person who has entered this country who attracts those definitions and who's entered after December 2014 satisfying the 5-year rule is entitled to an automatic citizenship, because that is not what the CAA says. That's point number one. Point number two. Point number two is the repetitive question with respect to secularism, 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 secularism. Okay. The argument of the left, and I don't think this is Nikhilji's argument as well. Nikhilji's argument is primarily from a CAA NRC point of view. So I don't think that is what I'm addressing. I'm addressing the other argument coming from out in the open. Okay, Nikhilji, wherever you think I'm misrepresenting your position, please let me know. Okay, so this is not Nikhilji's position at all. The argument of secularism effectively says that since India recognizes all its citizens regardless of their religion, please don't recognize any religion or religion-based persecution, even with respect to those people who are being persecuted because of their religion and have become refugees in their own countries. Okay, in my humble opinion, I say this with a lot of respect, this is the stupidest possible argument, okay, which I have heard in a very long time, to say that secularism which is to be observed in India requires India to put blinkers with respect to religion-based persecution which happens in its neighborhood in granting citizenship. अरे भाई मापदंड का बुनियाद ही religion है because they are being persecuted on the basis of religion, और आप ये कह रहे हैं कि आप उनके religion को और persecutor के religion को दोनों को recognize मत कीजिए. What stupidity is this? The entire factum of persecution, and that's exactly what even Nikhilji was saying, that he doesn't disagree on this particular aspect, that even today, persecution in these neighborhoods with respect to non-Muslim communities is because they belong to non-Muslim identities. That is a fact. And for states which have been established on the basis of a two-nation theory, we are being told that after increasing radicalization before Zia-ul-Haq and even after that post-Zia-ul-Haq, where that particular country has become the hotbed of Islamism and radical Islam across the world, and it is seen as the epicenter of global export for terrorism, we are being told that non-Muslim communities are not suffering persecution because of their religion. Then I'm sorry, you've buried your head deep within the earth and you need to lift it out and look at the reality and smell the coffee. Okay, so one, the argument of secularism is not an argument based on any specific provision of the Constitution. It is based on the extrapolation from the preamble of the Constitution to say that that particular aspect of the preamble comes in the way of the exercise of executive discretion to say, if you implement a certain refugee policy which recognizes that religion is the basis of persecution and religious minorities are the basis of persecution, it automatically translates to violation of Article 14. Then neither have you understood the concept of executive privilege, nor have you understood the concept of Article 14, nor have you done justice to the concept of secularism. On all three aspects, you have failed according to me. This is the second argument.
Sai, you have muted yourself accidentally. You have muted yourself accidentally.
Yeah. So was I audible until the last statement?
Just the last, I think.
You need to restart from this new point that you were making.
Okay, the restart. Okay. Now coming to the next argument. So I've addressed so far the civilizational aspects. I've addressed the legal aspect with respect to how the CA is expected to function. I've also identified the fact that the rules are yet to come out. And in the absence of those rules, none of these people who otherwise attract the definition can satisfy the requirements, because documentary requirements will have to be satisfied before they're entitled to the exemption from the definition of illegal migrant. Until then, they don't get the benefit of being citizens. And until then, any proceedings which have been initiated against them with respect to illegal migration will continue. So abatement will happen only after that particular status has been given. But there is one more aspect of citizenship that people have to note. What they have not seen is that this entire thing of CAA, what is the practical consequence? The only practical consequence is the reduction of the period of residence from 12 years to 5 years for the purposes of showing that you intend to stay in this country and you have stayed in this country for 5 years without creating any trouble. Okay. So there is a difference in the period of residence that non-beneficiaries of the CAA are supposed to show and the beneficiaries of the CAA are supposed to show. Therefore, for a moment, let's assume that there is no CAA at all. Members of all these 6 communities coming from the very same 3 Islamic republics would still be entitled to apply for citizenship in India, but they have to satisfy the prolonged period of 12 years for the purposes of residence. What has happened is, as a consequence of escalating scenes of, let's say a situation of persecution in those countries, thanks to their identity or no thanks to their religious identity, okay, this particular government has decided to effectively reduce the particular period to say, we will try and process your applications as fast as possible. Now, on this thing, I completely agree with Nikhilji to the extent of saying I need to understand the rationale of December 2014. Okay, apart from the symbolism that the year 2014 has for this particular dispensation, okay, what is the other rationale that the government has? Frankly, that is where I think the government stumbles a bit. Okay, with respect
Sai, I think one of the rationales at that time, Sai, was that the law gets passed in 2019,
right,
December,
right,
and gets into force in 26. So that 5-year period expires immediately, and therefore you can immediately take all those LTVs and make them citizens.
So that's where I think it's an important point.
But so, that to me is not rationale at all. That is a very meager idea.
Agreed.
It's a very meager
Agreed.
idea.
See, on the LTV aspect, and this is where I think Nikhilji has highlighted one thing which is very important. Before the CAA, long-term visas for the very same communities were introduced by this government. Okay. So the very same metrics and the very same yardsticks were used for the purposes of granting of LTVs. And I know this for a fact because I facilitated at least the grant of one LTV for one Pakistani Muslim who had converted and had married a Hindu in India and become a Hindu. And she was being hounded out by her relatives. And therefore, we had tried to give her some kind of support. And another organization actually played a role in this. And I was consulted for a very limited period of time. So this is my experience there. So the problem there is only with respect to 2014. Okay. But you see, this very limitation of 2014 actually goes against the argument made with respect to CAA NRC, which I'll come to subsequently. Okay. Which is, assume for a moment that any person, upon the initiation of NRC, if there is one Hindu and one Muslim, they are not in a position to establish their credentials with respect to their citizenship of India or how long they have stayed in India. None of this immediately translates to the presumption that the Hindu has come from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. That's what I'm trying to say. You know why? Because if you have to show that you're entitled to the benefit under CAA, notwithstanding the fact that you've been kicked out from the NRC process, you still have to establish your antecedents that you've come from Pakistan, Afghanistan, or Bangladesh. Okay? Therefore, your word alone is not going to count the moment you say, no, if I don't qualify these particular requirements for the purposes of NRC, kindly treat me as a Hindu who has come out of Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan, because that is not the basis for the grant of these benefits under the CAA, and that has not been the basis for grant of even LTVs, which Nikhilji pointed out, because you need to show at least one document which has been issued by those countries in your name, which establishes the fact that at some stage you've been either the citizen or the resident of these 3 countries. Now, please ask yourself this simple question. When was the last batch of refugees from Pakistan which has come into India, except these people who have been coming for the last 15-20 years? Baki jitne bhi aaye hain, partition ki immediately baad aaye hain. Okay. So more than 90% of Hindus in this country are not people, and their descendants are not people who will be in a position to show any document that establishes their Pakistani connection or Afghan connection or Bangladeshi connection, by the way. Okay. Now, here's the important aspect. The rules which are yet to come are yet to specify what documents will be needed to show a connection with these 3 countries. And we are proceeding on the basis that as and when a national NRC is held, Hindus who stand exempted from the NRC process because of their failure to prove their citizenship will conveniently and automatically fall within the basket of the CAA. that is where there is a limited ground of overlap, and that is where there is a limited ground of agreement and departure. How and why? Let me explain why. What is being cited in this regard is the statement made by Shri Amit Shah from a political podium on a regular basis, I think when he was addressing an audience in Assam in the Northeast. Okay? And that particular statement is being used to make the argument. He made a statement subsequent to which the CAA has come, and suddenly the government has got serious with the NRC. Therefore, there is a correction between these three sentiments, and therefore what is being pushed is a fascist, Hindutva, neo-Nazi, Hindu supremacist agenda is the argument that the left has been making for quite some time. अरे भाई थोड़े अपने सीक्वेंस को तो ठीक कर लो, आपका सीक्वेंस इतना मतलब it is so घिसा पिटा, it's horrible. Why? NRC came out when? In 2003. Okay? The concept of a national NRC as well as an Assam NRC, as Nikhilji rightly pointed out, has been in the statute book at least since 2003. Okay? How? Because a specific provision of the Citizenship Act which allows the government to pass rules, which is I think section 14 of the Citizenship Act, was invoked, pursuant to which rules were spelled out, which is the citizenship rules of 2003, where the concept of census, NPR and NRC came out right then. Now with respect to grant of citizenship to these persecuted Hindus in these three countries, in Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan, is that a discussion that has happened under this particular dispensation? No, it has happened even during the Constituent Assembly debates. And at that time, the discussion was limited only to two communities, Hindus and Sikhs. So what has happened is that a discussion in the Constituent Assembly debate, which was limited to two specific communities, has now been extended to 4 other communities, including Christians. And then we are saying, why Christians? Here's the reason. Those people who converted to Christianity in Pakistan around that period were from the same categories of non-Brahmins, non-Kshatriyas, non-Vaishya community, who realized that in order for them to survive in the new holy land of Pakistan, they will have to adopt at least one identity, which is the identity of the book. And as opposed to choosing Islam, they chose Christianity. So these people were previously people who came from the same Namashudra category and the scheduled caste category of Hindus, who had to convert because of the forces of history acting at that particular point of time. That is why they've been included, because this factum is also captured in history on this particular issue. Now, so you have NRC, which is of 2003, which has not been challenged till date, by the way. Okay, 2003 से लेके 2020 तक NRC statute book में है और किसी ने इसको constitutionality के basis पे challenge नहीं किया है. They're saying the reason why we think it should be challenged now is because there is a seemingly unholy nexus that is being drawn between CAA and NRC. That's the argument. Now, CAA and the very same communities which are sought to be benefited from the CAA have been the communities in discussion under the Congress dispensation in 2009 to 2014, and subsequently again in the first term of the NDA between 2014 to 2019, the very same discussion happened. Okay, so what has changed? What has changed is now the hype perception that everyone who is a Hindu or who belongs to these 6 communities and who shall stand excluded from the NRC automatically falls within the scope of the CAA. Frankly, it has absolutely no basis in facts, and that particular jump is unwarranted. That fact applies only to Hindus who have come from Bangladesh and who are in Assam and who are in a position to show that they are from Bangladesh and who have been in India since 2014. So not a single Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, Sikh or Christian will be a beneficiary of the CAA unless and until he shows a document that traces his origins to these 3 countries. That's the basic aspect. So unless that particular requirement or that particular threshold or that Lakshman Rekha is parified, so to speak, there is no question of them even being considered for the purposes of eligibility of the benefit of the CAA. That's point number 3. Point number 4 is with respect to the NPR NRC CAA nexus on a slightly different aspect. And as Nikhilji rightly pointed out, one is a head count, the other is a distinction between citizens under that particular head count and non-citizens under that particular head count. And the third limb being, under the non-citizens, how many of them are foreigners, how many of them are ordinary residents staying in India for 6 months, and how many of them are actually illegal migrants who are neither foreigners and who have no justification to enter India without persecution and have come here only for the purposes of greener pasture or because there's another larger design at play. Okay. Now, on this aspect, the one thing that I have said, at least in public more than once, is that the government should consider other alternatives to weed out illegal deportation as well, which the government already has the benefit of, in a report authored by Justice Jeevan Reddy's under Justice Jeevan Reddy's stewardship, which is the 175th Law Commission report, which Sri Arun Jaitley signed off, and this was, I think, in July to September 2000, where they said, if you really want to go after deportation of illegal migrants and you want to weed out illegal migration as well, then constitute more tribunals. But the problem is, and here's where it's important, the NRC, the Foreigners Tribunals, which was established in Assam, has proven to be an abysmal, disappointing experience where you have invested crores of rupees in that particular infrastructure. But by the time the process is completed, you only achieve deportation of a handful of people in double digits or in triple digits, which is what even the Supreme Court recognized in its judgments, saying you have initiated this process, but the rate of deportation is so abysmal. Why? Between 1985 to 1998, there is recorded documents and literature to show that there is an organized racket in this country for regularizing illegal migrants, especially Bangladeshi Muslims. And there are any number of forces which have effectively set up base in this country to facilitate the process of legalization of these people in India. Okay? And that's precisely why when NRC Assam was completed, the maximum number of people who were excluded from this particular process out of the, I think, 19 lakh people, 1.9 million people, maximum 70% of them were Hindus, minimal number of them were actually Muslims. Okay? And most of the Bangladeshi Muslims who were suspected of being illegal migrants and who had entered this particular country without any kind of actual documentation were protected and benefited as a consequence of an organized racket for regularization, which has lasted since 1985 at the very least. According to me, it's even before. Okay. Now, the CAA is meant to benefit these people who are languishing in these camps, in these so-called internment camps. Okay. Because those people who are actually supposed to benefit from the CAA have been have lost out and stand exempted from the NRC process. Okay. Even there, I repeat, and this is the red line, this is the litmus test. If those people are not able to prove any antecedents establishing their connection with any of these three countries, they cannot get the benefit of the CAA. Their word of mouth or their statement alone is not sufficient to give them the benefit of the doubt that they indeed come from these three countries. Okay. So unless and until anybody satisfies this particular requirement, the nexus that is sought to be drawn between the CAA and the NRC, according to me, is unsustainable. And most importantly, the one thing that Nikhilji said, which I agree with and partially disagree with because it's incomplete according to me, is that the NRC structure or the process, or let's say the principle, has been captured since 2003, yes. But the rules for a national NRC have not yet been notified the way rules were specifically notified for NRC Assam. Why is this important? NRC Assam का जो कट ऑफ डेट है वो था 24 मार्च 1971, okay, midnight. By the way, what is also important to note in this particular regard is even that date is not final, because that date is the consequence of Section 6A special provisions which apply to Assam with respect to the Citizenship Act, and that very provision is the subject of a constitution bench proceeding at this point of time, thanks to a judgment of the Supreme Court of 17th of December 2014, headed by Justice Ranjan Gogoi and Justice Rohinton Nariman, wherein the question was, Assamese people are saying, for the rest of the country, you seem to be having 1951 as the cutoff date for the purposes of establishing citizenship. With us, we said that neither the date of January 1966 is acceptable, nor is the date of January or March 1971 acceptable. Why are you imposing this particular date for Assam alone? This is effectively a violation of Article 14 as well as Article 355 of the Constitution, because the Union has the duty to protect the territorial integrity and the demographic composition of its constituent states as well. And you have entered into an Assam Accord of 1985, subsequent to which you have come out with an extended cutoff date of 1971. That means those illegal migrants who have entered Assam from 1951 and 1971 effectively are outside the scope of any kind of scrutiny, and you have defeated the purpose of the Assam Accord, is their very contention. So the NRC of Assam is also not final. We don't know what is the cutoff date going to be with respect to the rest of India, which is why rules for a national NRC pursuant to Rule 4 of the Citizenship Rules of 2003 is important for us to wait and watch. Until we see the rules for CAA, until we see the rules for NRC, until we see how the overlap is and what kind of people get the benefit of this particular overlap, and will all those people be able to say that I am entitled to CAA if I'm not entitled to NRC, I think any kind of statement at this point of time that this is necessarily anti-Muslim and this is necessarily anti-Muslim who are of Indian origin or Indian descent is premature, lacks any basis, and is certainly not supported by any of the documents which already exist in public domain. So that's my position. Morally, India has an obligation. The last point, and that's a slippery slope, but that's my position, that India, as where Nikhilji rightly says, has the identity of a civilization, has its primary duty to those adherents of its civilizational faith, so to speak, who are being persecuted for the very same faith in the neighborhood. Therefore, India has an obligation to them. India's obligation to the Hindus, the Christians, the Sikhs, Parsis, Jains, and Buddhists of Bangladesh, of Pakistan, Afghanistan, is more than Ahmadiyas and other Muslims of Pakistan or Bangladesh or Afghanistan, because they specifically asked for the creation of those states on a religious basis, at the very least Pakistan and Bangladesh. Therefore, those people who specifically wanted the establishment of Islamic republics by cleaving it away from India cannot say that they must be treated at par with non-Muslim minorities in those countries who are the subject of persecution. It makes no sense at all. It doesn't even pass muster on the annals of Article 14. So it's an ahistoric argument, it's an immoral argument, it's a convenient argument, and it is certainly not an argument that meets the annals of the Constitution under Article 14. That's my position.
All right, Nikhil, so you can respond to Sai now while I channel my inner leftist again.
Sure. When I started, Sai was absent. His screen wasn't present, so I couldn't pay to him the same deft compliment that he paid to me. So, I mean, Sai is a very well-regarded lawyer. I mean, by well-regarded, I mean, to use his own word, scintillating litigator. And this is not something really I say. The Supreme Court judges themselves have recognized in a number of cases. So he's a very well-read man, and you can see that in his submissions. Except he's also a very tricky litigator, because he uses certain things for his benefit which he claims don't exist when I assert them. And that is, in fact, the citizenship rules. So he uses them to say they will be something else. Or when I say that they will be something else, he says, no, they don't exist as yet, so we can't use them one way or another. So if we have a neutrality to that, I think it might be a better position, but it's not so much that. I think there are a couple of things that I want to first point out where I'm in total agreement with him. And certain other things which he says are the basis of this act, which, to my mind, you cannot simply pull these out. The law has to be clear that there is a certain basis to it. There has to be something behind it which says, okay, we are seeing certain movements within society that require these laws be passed. But on something that he said in relation to Hindus in Pakistan, I mean, this is actually documented as early as 47, 48. I mean, if you read, there's actually a very wonderful book by an author called Alice Albinia, which is called The Empires of the Indus. And if the opening 2 pages of that book will shatter you, I kid you not. Because the opening 2 pages are about this one person from a Hindu community who's jumping down a manhole in Clifton, which is one of the more upmarket areas in Karachi, only to go clean the sewers and then head back to his home, which is miles away, because they can't even be kept within the domain of the city where Muslims might be visible. And they were specifically kept in 47, 48. You will find there are notifications within Pakistan that say they were specifically kept and retained for the purpose of doing these kind of menial jobs. It's astounding, but this is how they were kept. So there are waves of migration even in 47, 48. There is one, of course, the big one in 47 around independence. And then in 48, there was a mass migration of Dalits from Pakistan who were like, well, we're going to be treated the same way out here, so we don't want to be here. Plus, there is the added religious persecution. And in fact, at that time, if I'm not mistaken, either Liaquat Ali Khan or Jinnah himself had made statements placating them, which placations have completely failed and proved to be false. Right, so this is just to reassert what Sai was saying in this regard. Now, I want to go back to a couple of the points that he makes in relation to the rules of the CAA. He's completely correct. Those rules have not been passed. But he is wrong in saying that this was limited to certain statements Amit Shah makes only in relation to Assam. He doesn't. Amit Shah was repeated and clear. And why I think Amit Shah is correct comes from the structure of CAA. Amit Shah repeatedly said, हम जाके उनको citizenship देके आएंगे अभी जो लोग आए उनको हम देके आएंगे इसमें क्या problem है they will be given citizenship immediately. When you introduce this idea of immediacy and you are the rule making authority, then you tend to betray your mind that your rules are going to create a very low threshold when it comes to the idea of who is a Hindu from Pakistan or not. Now, one of the things that Sai represents is, I am saying that Hindus will have it easier. My point isn't that Hindus will have it easier. My point is that Muslims will have it harder. That's the issue he doesn't address, right? And that's the flip side of the coin to the argument that he was making. I'll come and elaborate upon that in a bit, but there are certain other points that I wanted to touch upon first. He's made a very convincing case when he talks about it, and frankly, this is stuff we've all read about for a long period of time. It's come through in our media from time to time, even though there is a lot of censoring in this regard. It has come through in a number of scholastic arguments and debates that there appears to be this sort of unfinished business agenda when it comes to the greater Bangladesh. There may be an unfinished agenda business when it comes to Pakistan, and therefore we must push populations in because demography is destiny. I mean, this is essentially what it comes down to. I have no problems accepting that these kinds of movements may well be occurring in India. But you cannot pass a law without the express justification being in place. This justification finds no mention in any prior standing committee. It finds no mention in the statements of objects and reasons, and it certainly finds no mention in the actual text, right? So it is tenuous to say that this is the basis on which the CAA NRC combination was created. I can understand, and we're all we all reside here. We all understand that there are a number of persons who of extremely suspicious, dubious origins, who have been in this country for a long period of time, who may have come from Bangladesh, who may have come from other states. But it is absolutely impossible to say that there is a greater design in relation to them unless the state itself comes out and says it. So that basis and that justification for the law, I'm sorry, to me, it is difficult to accept that justification can nominally be accepted. It may be acceptable as a first principles argument in some larger debate, but not to a specific and analytical framework within the constitutional analysis of the legislation concerned. Now, one of the more interesting things that Sai makes, and I think while we both agree on the idea that India is a civilizational state, and that civilizational aspects of this nation are quintessential to its own existence, to its own architecture, we do differ on something quite significant when it comes to the notion of citizenship. There are two notions of citizenship. One is called jus soli, and the other is called jus sanguinis. Jus soli is citizenship by birth. Jus sanguinis is citizenship by descent. And in my views, what Sai sets up is a jus sanguinis kind of basis, because he looks at descent. He looks at what your loyalties are, whether you have been a part of sort of the original groups of this country, whether you are one of that set of Muslims who chose to acquire for themselves another set of nations and took territory away from the larger civilizational territory, and therefore should not be permitted now. Whereas the Indian Constitution comes into force after these debates stand somewhat settled. I mean, you cannot look at a constitutional document and say, oh, this was forced down our throats. I mean, it simply will not work. Article 5, Article 6, Article 7, when you read them together, make it perfectly clear that the jus sanguinis basis for citizenship has cut-off dates. Where you come from, who you are, as a basis for citizenship has cut-off dates. There are certain dates given in Article 6. If you are a citizen of, if you were in Pakistan and you come to India by a certain date, you are a citizen of India going forward. If you are a citizen of India and you have left and gone to Pakistan and stayed there beyond a particular cutoff date, don't think you can come back. Right? Those are origin arguments. Those were dealt with. After that, beyond that, the Constitution itself leaves the idea of citizenship to the passage of a particular law. And that law is the Citizenship Act. And the Citizenship Act strictly, and in my view, even to date, follows the principle of jus soli. And jus soli to me is fundamentally something that the Indian ethos and Indian civilization accepts most basically. If you are born here, you are ours. We even embrace those who come from outside. We don't look at your origins whatsoever. Right? So to combat that, Sai makes a very profound set of arguments on how there are these Tirth visas, people come, they disappear, they are not traceable. How do we discover them? I agree with all of that. I think these are huge problems. These are huge problems. But you don't create mechanical structures within the law that will pose everybody else into a darker situation. Now, as to these citizenship amendment rules, I mean, let's be clear that Amit Shah himself goes and says, we will give citizenship to everyone, right? He is the rule-making authority. He's one of the rule-making authorities. He gives an indication, but that doesn't mean the rule is in place. He's absolutely right. Rules are not in place. That also means that his assertion that you have to show some document of origin also may not stand scrutiny, because it may very well be they just turn around and say, look, as I had said, look, it is a fundamental reality. If you are a Hindu, a Christian, a Sikh, a Jain, a Buddhist, or a Parsi in this country, you either have been here forever and ever and can show it in some form or the other, even if it is through neighbors' testimony, or you would have come only from these three countries. The smattering of people who haven't are insignificant to the larger debate. They are a very small exception here. So the rules would actually, if they set a very high threshold for the CAA documentation, if they set a very high threshold saying you must first show you came from Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan, then you must show that there is in fact religious persecution, I think they would completely undo the CAA. And I would in fact then challenge them for being contrary to the act itself. Because the act, in my view, presumes religious persecution, and it correctly presumes religious persecution. We are talking about countries where populations of Hindus as large as of these communities as large as 20-23% have dwindled to below 2%. And that is, I mean, the world screams, the big G spot in the world is genocide. They will scream genocide at everything else. They will never look at the word genocide when it comes to this context. And it stuns me. This hypocrisy always stuns me. And I think he and I will find common ground on that you have left us and the Indian Parliament as the sole source that has to then come forward and say, we must give protection, right? But then the structure of the law becomes very curious. The CAA is not an act, the CAB, as it used to be, is tabled sometime in the late 90s. This is not a new legislation that the BJP certainly came up with. It is also not a legislation that did not have greater bases across the country, by the way. There was great coherence to this. There is a speech by Manmohan Singh in Parliament saying we must introduce this. We must pass this law when they were in opposition, when the Vajpayee government was in power. Right? But it gets passed in 2014. Why does it get passed in 2014? Because they saw the disaster that the NRC was in Assam. Now, when you pass this law in 2014 to undo the damage you have done, because Sai is absolutely correct in his numbers, the provisional listing of illegal immigrants under the Assamese NRC was 38 lakh people. The final listing was 19 lakh people. Out of that 19 lakh people, about 12 and a half lakhs were Bangladeshi Hindus, which coincidentally, the Ahomiyas have no problem with. They say that all of these people must go, whether they are Hindu or they are Muslim, they must go because they are not originally Assamese. But the central government turns around and says, now we need to do something because this has been a total disaster, an unmitigated disaster, which, by the way, any NRC is going to be. That is my experiential view of the Indian state. It cannot undertake such a big exercise. It may attempt it, that's fine, but it simply will fail. But once this disaster occurred, you wanted to undo this. And so therefore the CAB, which has been the CAB for 20 odd years, suddenly gets passed as the CAA, right? The Assam NRC exercise has certain cutoff dates. The CAA, as it is passed, accommodates those cutoff dates and make sure that people are brought in. I have no objections to any of this, to be perfectly fair with you. The CAA, I have no objections to. But the NRC procedure, why am I setting up all of this basis? Because Sai says you can't today turn around and say that without the citizenship amendment, without the appropriate rules for the NRC and the appropriate rules for the CAA as to what the standard will be. I am setting up this background to show that if all of these things need to be satisfied, in fact, that threshold has to be low. And today, you may very well still start applying the CAA. I mean, there is nothing that says rules must be passed. You can very well start applying it. Today, the Act does not suggest anywhere whatsoever that there are, in fact, requirements to prove one thing or the other. So if a notification were issued by the state today, by the central government today, saying, we say X number of people are all citizens of India by virtue of the CAA, there is nothing in the act that would say, oh, you couldn't have passed this, or it certainly wouldn't be a notification ultra virus the act, right? My larger problem is never as to complainants, and he correctly points out Article 14 also does not come to the favor of anyone outside of this country. My complaint and my concern is only about creating a communal differential in the requirement of proving citizenship. And to my mind, if the CAA rules create a very low threshold, that problem in fact does arise and incurably arises. And it is going to inconvenience and damage a lot of people. And there, once that does happen, I can see some of these arguments that you say are the left-wing arguments that start to make certain amount of sense, because then you are creating a sense of victimhood for one community only and othering of one community only. So, maybe we're having this a little too quickly because a very important component, which is the rules under the CAA and the rules of the NRC, are still missing. But my experience, my experience suggests, and my reading of the way things have gone so far suggests that if they have seen the NRC in Assam, they're not going to make a very complicated documentary route for the CAA, and they're not going to make a very complicated documentary route for the NRC. So the undocumented who are going to suffer inevitably have to be Muslims. And so that is a problem that this law will have to accommodate somewhere along the line, right? A couple more points to make. Yeah, so this secularism argument is a very interesting sort of point. I mean, Sai, and I completely agree with Sai, and I think he's done a terrific job of demolishing the idea of secularism being the basis of denying citizenship to persecuted communities from another country, where the basis of their persecution is religion in the first place, to come to India and to say, oh, it would be unsecular to give you citizenship. I mean, it just boggles the mind. And I think he was harsh enough also in that condemnation, and I certainly agree with that. But the secularism argument, inward looking, is the problem. And secularism, people love saying secularism in India only comes from this amended, and I say mal amended because it's an amendment snuck in during the emergency in 1977, or just after the emergency during the emergency in 1977, to put secularism into the preamble. Sai and I are both lawyers. Believe me, the preamble doesn't help you for anything when it comes to interpreting constitutional provision. You have to look to the constitution itself and the historical elements of it. So whenever I see these arguments on Twitter and elsewhere, people say, oh, but the preamble was amended. The boss, you can put in Rajnikant in the preamble still has no strength. Okay, it means nothing. It does not suddenly become a superhuman. It doesn't. But where secularism does exist is Article 15, is Article 25, Article 26, Article 28, Article 29, Article 30. I have problems with a lot of these articles. But the fact that they exist means secularism is a fundamental ideal of the Indian state. And to that end, I will even go so far as to say secularism and a secular outlook to, as you yourself, Kushal, often say, we don't do tolerance in this country. We do acceptance. Right? That is a fundamental trait of our civilizational existence. So I don't think I ever have to establish by legal argumentation that is India secular, is India not secular? India is most certainly secular. It is secular in the letter and spirit of the constitution. It is secular in its civilizational ethos. And so therefore it will not accept a sort of graded citizenship. It will not accept not a graded citizenship, but certainly a test for citizenship that creates a communal differential, right? A couple more points that I had noted down that I wanted to get past. No, I think this is pretty much my response to what Sai says so far. I would just like to add that, I look at a little bit of the conduct of the government in all of this. Because today, to me, because of your nature of your majority now, in both houses of parliament, there's really a very small distinction between executive and parliament and the legislative branches, because what the executive proposes, the parliament can push through quite regularly. And I have to give it to them. They are extremely creative in the legal devices they use In fact, I think Article 370, the way they dealt with it, is one of the most creative legal devices I have ever come across anywhere. Brilliant, like absolutely brilliant. I may have problems with it, but it's brilliant. You sit back on these issues for 5-6 years after coming to power. You don't initiate debate. You move straight away with a bill and you pass it in December because of ostensibly to people like me, from what I can see, because of what has happened in Assam. Then you get these protests, right? And you sort of deal with it with this whole chronology. Samajhiye, pehle CAA aayega, by the way. Pehle CAA aayega, fir NRC aayega. Although NPR, etc. has already commenced. And NPR say you will be able to collate the NRC. What those rules may be, again, Sai is correct, those rules are not there. But the structure is already in place of the law and they can't deny that fact. You get opposition to this and that opposition starts to feel like it is quite substantial. So there are certainly no rules are passed. Suddenly there's no NRC being talked about. The Prime Minister himself goes to the Ram Leela Maidan and says there's no NRC being discussed with the cabinet today. I have a problem to the extent that if you are sure about the legal steps you are taking, take them all. Don't sit back and try and take them piecemeal, dip your toe in the water, find it freezing, step back again. You need to either do all of this together so that there is complete clarity for everybody, or you wait till the time at which you can do all of it together. But, we are two fairly well-considered lawyers sitting here going like, how do I interpret how the CAA will go? Well, there's no set of rules, but okay, so if the rules aren't there and there's a law, well, the law says this. Oh, I could interpret it one way or the other. This is not how you're going to deal with people's lives. This is citizenship you're talking about. It causes upheaval to every aspect of their existence. So, I have my fear, therefore, stems more from the way the government has behaved on these things, rather than from necessarily all this legislation. I can interpret ways by which all this legislation can be clean. Honestly, I can do that very easily. And I can do that because, there are enough tools within the law to do it. A well-meaning government should be able to direct its officers to do exactly the same. Should be no problem at all. The district magistrates have been put into a peculiarly powerful position by virtue of the Citizenship Amendment Rules of 2003. These are the same guys, by the way, who will first decide who is a doubtful citizen and then be the persons who recommend cases for the foreigners tribunals. And then you fall into the foreigners tribunals. I mean, these are extremely strenuous proceedings for anybody to undergo. It will be a disaster for our civilizational ethos, for our fabric, if we are having majoritarily only one community facing this music. It simply will not sit well with any of us. That is my view. So, this is an important point that I do want to get across. The government needs to be clear. You want to pass a law, you pass it whole hog. You don't sort of mess around with it.
All right. So, Sai, before you can respond, I just have, I have channeled my inner leftist again. So I'm going to give you a response. So a response of a leftist would be that, look.
Well, one second, Kushal, when it comes to this schizophrenic inner leftist of yours, I assume, I assume both of us, for both of us, we can go to town on this, right? I mean,
that's okay.
This is not limited to, just because Sai is coming up next doesn't mean that if I get a full toss, I'm not going to hit it out of the park, right? I mean, let me just be clear.
Yeah, I know. So here's my, then what we can do is, because I want to because there are too many questions too. So I'll just make a short statement, then you can respond to both of us, and then we'll take the live viewers questions. So the retort someone will give is that, look, after 1947, two countries took two different directions, right? One country decided to become a theocratic state, which was based solely on religion, and they decided that religion will play a role in their life and in their functionality in every possible way. The other country, i.e. India, decided that we will be a secular democratic republic and we will not allow religion to play an active role in our lives. Now, if that is the case, how can we justify something like the CAA and NRC in a combination? Because that is directly confronting the very idea and the basis of what India decided to do in 1947, and it set itself apart from the idea of what that was Pakistan. Now, obviously, you have Pakistan, Bangladesh too. So, in such a scenario, either the government of India is now pushing itself, which is the larger discussion. That's why revisiting the idea of India. Then the government of India is pushing towards the most undefined term in the history of the human race, and that is the real view of Kushal Mehra, just for the clarification, which is Hindu Rashtra. Because nobody knows what a Hindu Rashtra is. Everybody seems to use the term. So this would be the response. Now, Sai, you can respond to both of us. And this time, Sai, you have to keep it a little shorter because we have too many questions. So go for it.
Okay. So here, I think it's very important to respond to two specific points that Nikhilji made. Article 11, under which the Citizenship Act has been promulgated, Dr. Ambedkar, as part of his Constituent Assembly debates, made it abundantly clear that the article and the provision that comes as a consequence of the article shall not be shackled by the provisions of Articles 5 to 10. In fact, they can even take an independent position altogether. That was the position that was highlighted. Second, the Citizenship Act, when you read citizenship by birth, by descent, as well as by registration, is not entirely based on birth alone. In fact, there is a significant blood connection that is actually established both in sections 5 and 6, where it speaks of birth as well as by descent. Okay, so India has not abandoned the jus sanguinis position in entirety. The only provision to that, which is an exception to this, is the first limb that speaks of 1950 to 1987 by birth. Okay, every other provision has at least one requirement where you have to be connected either to one parent or both parents. So from 50 to 87 is one part, 87 to 2003 is one part, from 2003 onwards is a separate part altogether. This is under section 5. So birth is not something that has defined the Citizenship Act entirely. So we do not accept anyone who is born in India as an Indian. There is a specific cutoff date that applies only to people born between 1950 January and 1987. That's point number one. The better part of the provisions actually are based on blood and descent. That is a fact. Okay. So in that sense, the spirit of the better part of the provisions from 1987 onwards is consistent with the spirit of Articles 5 to 10 of the Constitution, which has specific cutoff dates based on ancestry and people who are based in this country based on ancestry. That's point number one. Point number two is where I think I need to read out just one provision of the Citizenship Act so that this makes it abundantly clear as to what is the requirement. The specific provision that deals with the rulemaking power under the Citizenship Act, Amendment Act of 2019, where it speaks of these beneficiary communities, is Section 6B, which has been introduced as a consequence of the Citizenship Amendment Act. And this is the only provision which I believe is relevant from the standpoint of rules. The central government or an authority specified in its behalf may, subject to such conditions, restrictions, and manner as may be prescribed on an application, grant a certificate. So may prescribed on an application made in its behalf, grant a certificate of registration or a certificate of nationalization. So it says that subject to conditions, restrictions, and manner as may be prescribed. And Nikhil and I, both of us being lawyers, will know that by as may be prescribed would mean as prescribed by the rules. So whatever the rules say, once you satisfy those rules, you will get a certificate of either citizenship or a certificate of registration or naturalization for these beneficiary communities. So unless and until those rules are actually satisfied, it's not possible. But take a look at Section 6B2. This is very important. Subject to fulfillment of the conditions specified in Section 5 or the qualifications of naturalization under the provisions of third schedule, a person granted the certificate of registration shall be deemed a citizen of India. So until that certificate is granted to you, you will not be deemed a citizen of India, notwithstanding the fact that you come from these 6 communities and these 3 republics. So जब तक आपके हाथ में certificate नहीं है, आप भारत के citizen नहीं है. That's point number 2. Point number 3, and this is very important. So let's think of it this way. The Act itself says that you have to have date, and the Act itself says you have to come from 2 or 3 sets of countries. If the rules completely do away with the requirement of showing that you come from these 3 countries or that you've been in India since December 2014, I'm completely with Nikhilji to the extent of saying the rules undermine the Act, they are ultra vires the Act, and they will have to be struck down on that particular ground. You don't need to get into any constitutional discussion at all. Okay. I am asking myself this simple question. Are we saying that this government, or are we presuming that this government is going to come out with rules which effectively defeat the two specific pillars which have been set out in the Act itself, saying you don't need to show that you're from Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan, and you don't need to show that you've been in India since 2014. On that particular issue, while I share Nikhilji's, let's say, skepticism with respect to how the government has behaved, unless and until we have anything to show for at this stage, as he rightly says, this particular discussion or this particular fear is frankly speculation. It is in the realm of speculation. But the thing with respect to the inward-looking aspect, now that he has agreed with me that every outward-looking aspect with respect to external agents is not necessarily justified and it does not hold water, the only question is addressing the constituents within and people of this country, especially the fear of the minorities, that they will be the only ones to be shortchanged by the NRC, or they'll be the ones to be largely shortchanged by the NRC. And this is where, again, you go back to the simple question that Hindus are not better off when it comes to the NRC, and they are certainly not better off compared when it comes to the NRC, because they will again have to show or satisfy these requirements under the CAA. That's the basic point. Unless and until they are in a position to get a certificate to say that they are from these three countries, how are they better off, or how are the Muslims worse off? Both of them are equally bad, or both of them are equally good. The argument that the NRC is fundamental.
Sai, can you tell me which other country Hindus come from? Which other countries?
No. This is a question I have to ask myself. The requirement under the CAA is a twin requirement. It's a conjunctive requirement. Would you agree with me on that or not? It is a conjunctive requirement, right? And the conjunctive requirement is that you have to come from these three countries and you have to be in India since December 2014, right?
I agree it's a conjunctive requirement. I think where we differ is what is the standard that will satisfy the conjunction.
That's exactly what I'm coming to. So therefore it turns on what document you're supposed to show that you're effectively, or to demonstrate that you come from these three countries. That is the basic question, correct? And you're saying that the government is going to...
Okay, let me pitch it even higher. I think you can go even higher, and you can turn around and say, I would go higher, and I would turn around and say, you know, there are, for example, Section 114E of the Evidence Act says, and there are various other presumptions where a court can look at, this is in the context of a court. So, you know, a parliament and an executive can go even higher. A court can assume certain facts because they naturally exist. So therefore, in that context, I keep asking this. If Hindus don't come from India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, where do they come from?
No, so here's the thing. So we have effectively based this argument, at least the opposition to the CAA NRC composition or combination has based its argument on the fact that in the absence of any document, we expect the system to presume that Hindus have come from these three countries.
And I agree. And I agree. We're both able to speculate this way or that way because the government has left a blank slate so far. I understand that problem and I concede that problem.
And my only difference of view on that particular issue is I think it's a stretch of an argument to basically say that Hindus...
Look, let me put it this way to you, Sai. If they pass rules that make it very strict, that you must have, I will have no problems. Suddenly my fears dissipate.
Right. Agreed. Okay. Now, to that extent, do we agree that the riots which have been unleashed across the country, even before the rules have come out and the standard of evidence has been laid out, was premature?
Riots are always a bad
thing. No, I'm saying the opposition...
One second. Were they premature? Look, people don't operate solely in the field of this tight analysis. I mean, we are two lawyers sitting and we're saying, oh, it could go both ways. Right? So fears are something that are stoked, and I don't doubt for a moment. Fears are not created because a law is so clear. Fears are created because the politics around it is a larger thing, a larger beast. Let's distinguish between protests and riots. I understood the basis of protests. I, in fact, agreed that there needed to be protests. The character of these protests kept changing and evolving to a degree after a point. I was like, I cannot support this anymore. I look at some of the behavior of the Home Minister and I wonder, what did he think he was dealing with? And I look at some of the behavior of the protesters and I wonder, what did they think they were dealing with?
So here, since we are looking at it purely from the standpoint of what the document says, independent of what Mr. Amit Shah has said and what the protesters have said, and let's assume that both of them have acted in their own respective extremes, in their own respective manners, the answer lies in only one thing, which is, if the requirements ultimately don't even require these beneficiaries to show any document that they come from Afghanistan, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, then I admit and I will concede
that what Nikhilji has said is right. Okay, but if the rules specify that you need to show at least one document which shows that you have come from these three countries.
So let's note that is a point of conjunction for the both of us, because my opposite concession comes in as well. If the standard is very high, my problem is solved.
Right. And if it does not give any kind of room to local authorities to presume that because you're Hindus, you necessarily come from these three places, okay, then I'm happy to actually say, or at least I stand by my position and I've been vindicated in my particular position. So as on date, the language of a exists in public domain already, does not indicate anything to the contrary, that the rules will effectively dilute what the act specifies. Because the presumption cannot be that the rules will go against, but the presumption will be the rules will be consistent with. If the rules come out and they are inconsistent with the act, then the argument is a different argument altogether. That's an argument against the government, against the CAA NRC. There I'll completely concede. And just as
you're looking at the certificate of registration as being a substantive element, I look at it only as a ministerial act.
No.
A certificate of registration can be granted to any and everybody if you turn around and say, okay, we deem that these are people who suffered religious persecution and came from this country.
No, that's exactly the point. No, the specific provision says that the certificate of registration...
No, that can be self-declaratory. No, the rule could make it self-declaratory.
Here's the point. Therefore, again, it turns on evidence. It turns on what? What is the standard of evidence? If they say that your declaration and filing of an affidavit is sufficient, then the argument is very different.
All right. So I think we'll leave that as the open question, and that we can't blame us. We can't have an answer there.
Second, if such a provision is not made available to Muslims of India, that they cannot necessarily make a self-declaration for the purposes of showing that they're citizens of this country, then both these limbs will effectively lead to the conclusion that this nexus is an unholy anti-minority nexus. That is the only situation possible, right? As long as that is not there, for a moment, let's leave out riots and let's leave out protests. The fact remains that nothing in the act in itself dilutes the requirements of domestic citizenship. Nothing in the act in itself violates any principles of secularism, nor does it violate Article 14. I am saying the act in itself and the act in combination with NRC as well. Because during the course of his rebuttal, Nikhilji also highlighted that most of the Hindus who are exempt from the Assam NRC are actually Bangladeshi Hindus who stood exempted, as a consequence of which these people were hoping to get some kind of a benefit thanks to the CAA, right? So today we have to show
heinous examples from the Assam NRC as well, Sai.
Sorry.
There are very heinous examples from the Assam NRC. We're talking about decorated war veterans who were excluded from the Assam NRC.
See, which is why I think when we speak of the NRC separately, and this is something that I've said, the NRC as a process, as it was implemented in Assam, was far from ideal. And there, I don't think there is any question of disagreement between anyone at all. And the manner in which it was undertaken and the manner in which the government also opposed it and approached the Supreme Court to say that there are serious systemic chinks. Let's also remember one thing, and there I completely agree with Nikhilji, that the government seems to have a touch and scoot policy when it comes to serious issues. Okay. In 2014 to 2015, they spoke of Balochistan. It was suddenly occupying the headlines, and suddenly that was out of the window. Okay. Then 370 आप लेके आए, फिर आपके ये domicile के rules आए, and आपने फिर से थोड़ा पलटी मारा उसमें भी. Okay. The idea was at the end of the day that the scope of domiciliary certificates will not be limited only to central government officers in Kashmir or to Hindus of Kashmir, but you will also ensure that more people from the rest of India can visit that part of India. Okay.
My mother, for example.
So that is again a dilution. Now the test is whether the government is again going to result or let's say act in dilution and in derogation of certain positions that is already taken. So we start the pinch hitting overs, the first 15 overs are great, and then subsequently we start backtracking. That is a matter of policy and that is a matter of concern where I'm completely ad idem and on the same page with Nikhilji, that I hope the government does not do this kind of retraction with respect to these people, because the government has already recognized that they've been persecuted enough. It's a miserable lot. So I don't think we should add to their cup of overflowing miseries altogether by playing footsie with them, by coming out with rules which are unclear. That's neither fair to the persecuted minorities of those countries, nor is it fair to non-persecuted minorities of India, because a state of confusion is not desirable for either party. There I'm completely with him. I have no disagreement on that particular issue at all. Well, now I think I'm done. Let's take questions.
Kushal, you should jump in and stop us. Is his screen frozen? Yeah,
Yes,
he's disappeared. Wonderful.
we are ready, bhai. Sawal ke liye.
Okay. So now let's start taking the audience questions, and there are too many, so I'm gonna have to club a few questions together. So let's start with बहुत सारे हैं यार, मैं तो नीचे चल जाना पड़ेगा मेरे को, इतने सारे मैं इकट्ठा ही कर रहा था बैठ के. So a lot of people have actually questioned. I think you guys have answered this. I think Abhishek Singh had asked, what about the Assamese identity of people of Assam? Will it not be compromised by giving citizenship to Bengali Hindus? So I think we have covered that. Or does anybody have to make a point about that? About
No,
the
it is
identity?
compromised. Their position is compromised. There's no doubt it's compromised.
Yeah. So I mean, so how do we deal with that conundrum vis-a-vis CAA or NRC?
The government has dealt with it, boss. What are you going to deal with any further? It's been dealt with. It's done.
See, one was the ILP limitation, the inner line permit limitation that Mr. Shah has already given as an assurance. But the one thing that I think the government ought to have considered even better is that it can't be the responsibility of a certain region alone to rehabilitate all these people. If the government, as the union, is taking the responsibility of giving them citizenship, then it must try and share that particular burden across the board as many as possible. And here, I do believe that at the very least, BJP ruled states should have stepped up to say, we will absorb these people and not compromise the demographic composition of an already vulnerable flashpoint of the country. You don't want to incite passions in Assam anymore and give ammunition to those people who have been inciting secessionist movements in that particular place. Okay, particularly when the bone of contention has been the Assamese identity itself, because they are very right in saying that we want Assamese speaking people in this country as the majority. And the entire, I think the Barak Valley and the Brahmaputra Valley, this is where the entire distinction is, where you have Assamese speaking people and Bengali speaking people. This entire region is cleaved on the basis of language. So their concerns are fairly valid on that particular aspect. I don't think there's a problem there. And
let me add this. I have a serious problem with this ILP concept, because I find this to be, look, let me put it this way. Tomorrow, if I decide in Delhi that I've had enough of litigation in Delhi because this is just too heavy for me and I want to go live a more quiet and simpler life in Assam, ILP will actually restrain me from certain areas,
Right.
from entering into certain, and that should not happen. I completely agree that you need to be able to stop. So this is really about border control, a border control issue that we're trying to solve with paper. And this is the real problem with us, that we're not able to handle our borders with Bangladesh. Had we been able to do so, we'd be in a different position.
Okay, I'm going to have to be...
yeah.
Okay, so make a point. Then I'll ask the other question.
The principle of ILP, surprisingly, is not limited only to Assam, because you have even restrictions with respect to purchase of property in Himachal Pradesh and other places as well. So our ability to settle in most parts of the country is not as free as Article 19 promises, because it's largely based on the negotiations between each of those states, which ultimately acceded to the Union of India to preserve their respective identities. So there is a bit of a complicated history involved. So it's not entirely, we are in significant ways, we are United States of India, not just a Republic of India.
Yeah. So, okay, more questions. So this was an interesting question. So the user's name is Newton. So, well, is there any other country with a rule like CAA? And don't you think this kind of a thing would also create a security issue? As in, aap kisi ko bhi aane doge. I think they have misunderstood the CAA. They're assuming the CAA is an open passport where anybody can come. Although that's my stand at an individual level. I think it is our responsibility to let all those non-Muslims come. But having said that, that's a separate issue. So how do we deal with that? So I'll ask
the
one
first part of the question, I am not aware of any other country that specifically puts certain religions in there. Maybe one or two amendments in the US.
Israel has an open, clear-cut
Israel is a different concept. Israel, this is
but it is a country, right?
Well, 1 second. But the Israeli idea comes from the constitution itself, from the inception of the state itself. So let's keep Israel as a different marker. But whether you have Australia, whites only immigration policy for a long time, or you had the US, which has this sort of religious persecution idea also within its immigration, etc. I don't think anybody sort of pinpointed religious groups in the way in which we have, because everybody else's reality is not our reality, as he correctly points out. We come from a background of partition, and he's correct in saying this. You cannot ignore the influence of partition on a law of this sort, which is why it's so distressing that it's being done 70 years later, when the whole thing is so much more complicated to actually execute. This should have been done way back when, and the whole thing would have been easier to execute. Now it's a real distressful thing.
Okay, so Sai, a question for you is, how would the CAA help persecuted minorities who entered India after 2014?
It won't. they will have to effectively go back to the 12-year rule, which is what is prescribed in the third schedule to that act, where they will go by the standard route. The CAA benefit cannot be extended to them. Okay. Sorry, you meant after 2014, after 31st of December 2014.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. The answer is correct.
So effectively, the 12-year rule is what applies to them. That was debated as the 11-year period when the Constituent Assembly debates, but it's not as if the doors are shut. See, this is where I think the problem is. 90% of the people before whom we have discussed this particular issue are unable to understand that the lack of benefit under the CA does not mean shutting the door under other forms of entry available to India. Okay. The only benefit that these communities get is a shorter domiciliary period for the purposes of showing residence. And if that particular condition is satisfied and other conditions are satisfied, then they get the grant of certification. Otherwise, the procedure is still available even to Ahmadiyas and Muslims of Pakistan. How else can Adnan Sami have come to India?
This was, by the way, a point I'd made in my opening comments that the CAA is not at all exclusionary. It may be beneficial to certain sets of communities in terms of the time period differentiation, but it's not exclusionary at all.
It's expeditionary, not exclusionary.
Yeah. So, okay. So I have one more question for Sai. Then I have questions for Nikhil. So Sai, first of all, Shivdi says that he is a great fan of you. And then he goes on to say, I have a question for him about what about non-Muslim citizens still facing difficulties in the name of religion in other Islamic republics and who stay there or maybe in these Islamic republics and they don't migrate. So I think, again, it comes down to the same idea. Everybody is like, why is this 2014 date there? It is the most ridiculous concept ever. So everybody is like, ye kya baat hui ki 2014 ka angle kya hai? I mean, has the government really bungled it up?
Look, man, I'll tell you honestly, if you totally believe...
Nikhil, it's for Sai and then I'll
No, Nikhil ji ko bolne dijiye, please, let him finish.
Nikhil can make the comment. So, I am the moderator.
Okay. So, see, in fact, in my Rajya Sabha TV discussion on this, I specifically said that there appears to be a clear intent behind that particular date to the extent of benefiting those people who stand excluded by the NRC process in Assam, who are of Bangladeshi origin, because that was specifically meant to address that particular audience. And I, in fact, went to the extent of saying, assuming that is the case, then I'm completely for it and I stand by it, because an NRC which is being carried out in such a bungled up fashion and where other communities have had large organized bodies helping them when it comes to legalization, and the Hindus were the only ones who were shortchanged. It was India's duty to step up to that particular situation. While I believe that we don't have the same kind of clarity when it comes to Israel on religious matters, the fact is this is still a civilizational state according to me, and therefore India has a duty under the constitution, and I'm not tracing any of this outside the scope of the constitution. So I'm completely justified. I think the government is completely justified. And the very same argument I will give for everybody else. All Muslims, all non-Hindus and all non-Sikhs communities coming from any other part of the world are welcome to come to India for the purposes of asylum and for the purposes of shelter. The only thing is they will not get that limited benefit under the CAA. They will have to satisfy the standard requirements. This should effectively address on this particular vein by all people. We can move to other forms.
So I'm going to club three questions which were directed to Nikhil, and I'm going to ask three of them together. So one was asked by Ayush, who says, how can a Hindu who's actually an Indian not have documents to prove Indian citizenships, but can produce Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladeshi documents to avail CAA? That was one question. Nikhil, first you answer this, then I'll ask the other two, which were for you.
So this documentary requirement problem, let me be clear that Hindus are very possible Hindus will have no documents whatsoever, right? What the rules will eventually come forward with, whether again, this question assumes the rules will require a substantial amount of documentation to show that you're from somewhere else. My point is a very simple one. Let's say I am the DM under the NPR rules or the NRC rules, under the citizenship rules, and I have to look at dubious citizenship. I look at a Hindu, he's got no documents whether of India or of anywhere else. Why will I consider him dubious if the rules are such? If the law passed is that, because again, I keep coming back to this, to anybody's sense, there'll be a very simple thing. Hindus will come from where else? It is generally from these three countries, an overwhelming majority of them. Unless I find something which is contrary, which says, no, this guy actually came from Uganda and he just sort of slid in, then that's a different matter. Or came from Nigeria or came from somewhere else, and that's a different matter. But typically, I would assume that they have to be from one of these three countries.
Okay, so I have two more questions, Nikhil, and these two are actually interconnected. So there is a handle called Science Math who has asked this question. India is understood to have told Bangladesh that there was no talk of deportation. Why the hell are we conducting a nationwide NRC if no one is going to be deported? Second, was by Sasidharan, and he asked that did the potential beneficiaries actually get the citizenship? If not, what's stopping the government that took all the efforts to bring this law? Nikhil, do you have any updates and answers to this?
Well, so the first point on the first question, uh, I think the end game to all of this is to take away certain citizenship benefits. And so the most cynical view of all of this has been that this entire exercise is to reduce the sort of Muslim voter in Bengal. I mean, this is the most cynical view of why this is being done the way it is being done, because the idea is that, okay, you may live in India, but your citizenship, you're declared not to be a citizen. And so you will not get certain citizenry benefits. But in general, you get other benefits. I mean, you're given ration in any event. Doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or not. You are given other benefits, but voting will not exist. You will not be able to purchase certain kinds of land, and certain other benefits will not arise in your favor. I certainly hope we don't go down the path of these mass detention centers all over the country. I think that is an awful thing to do for any set of people. And certainly, if people have been in the country for a substantial period of time, to end up in a detention center, it does not speak to a mature country, a mature civilization. What was the second question, Kushal? Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I'll ask it again. The second was, did the potential beneficiaries actually get the citizenship? If not, what's stopping the government that took all the efforts? I think they have. Some people have actually gotten this citizenship.
No.
already,
Look,
right?
there are people. No, let's not confuse this. There are people always getting citizenship in India. Let's be clear about this. Whether they are Hindus or Muslims, they are always getting citizenship. Let's also make a distinction. CAA only speaks of religious persecution. There is an existing standard operating procedure of the government of India which deals with all forms of persecution, which will therefore also inherently deal with religious persecution, because persecution is not of only one variety. So under those rules, people are anyway getting citizenship. So merely because we've seen examples of people get citizenship does not necessarily mean that originated under the CAA. As far as I'm concerned, whatever reports I've seen of citizenship being given under the CAA, for example, there was a report of UP has given a list of X number of people who have to be given citizenship under the CAA. I don't know. I don't know whether that is accurate, because I don't know on what basis they've done this and on what basis the central government will accept this. As far as I know, and Sai can correct me if I'm wrong, there is not a single person who's been given citizenship under the CAA as far as now.
Correct.
All right. So, Sai, 3 questions for you now, because we have to go through a lot of them. So, I'm clubbing them together. So, first one is by Siddharth, who says, why is the government not keen to scrap the 42nd constitutional amendment of 1976, which is giving a mere veto power to play appeasement politics in India? That's the first question. I have 2 more. So, short answers, Sai.
Right. See, honestly, I don't think the government either has the vision or the depth for taking up these deep constitutional battles. And the one thing that I think has happened over the last few months, which is very, very clear, is that their PR narrative sucks, and that's an understatement. Okay. Their preparation and handling the media backlash is something that has left a lot to be desired. That's a fact. And I do believe the government does not seem to invest as much in these kind of intellectual pursuits for the long run. So for all practical purposes, the issues that the government has cut out for itself as part of its manifesto since 1998, since the very first NDA government, remain unresolved, and they will not be in a position to execute them, because I don't think there is sufficient intellectual investment on these aspects. In fact, they had commissioned a report. I think even Sri Parasaran was involved with that particular issue, looking at constitutional reforms of a whole range, wide-ranging reforms and amendments. But the moment they heard, there was a media backlash, they immediately scrapped even that particular committee for constitutional amendments. Okay, so I think they seem to lack the confidence to take up these issues. The 2 areas where I think the government has managed to show some amount of street smartness on the constitution, according to me, again subject to debate, 370 was decent, but perhaps there could have been greater transparency with which they went about it. But maybe they felt the transparency in these issues is not going to help. There's no other option, but we need to do surgical strike within the country itself. That's debatable. But constitutionally, I think it passes muster. CA, I think it passes muster. but they have been extremely reactionary and reactive to all the questions surrounding the CAA, where the PIB's only job was to constantly issue FAQs in the aftermath of the CAA when the riots broke out, about LGBTQs, about atheists, about this and that. But they did not have a sense of what was going to, what kind of resistance they were going to meet when this came out. So I think on that particular front, the government's reaction or preparation leaves a lot to be desired. There is no doubting about it.
Okay, so Keshav Shastri had said many Muslim leaders have declared that they will boycott the NPR come what may. If communities are going to boycott it on a large organized scale, how the hell are we going to actually remediate this thing, Sai?
So that depends on two things. In fact, the one thing I think here it becomes relevant, and to which Nikhil ji had responded previously, if you're not able to deport people, the once the law commission report comes out with two specific things: detention camps ki koi zarurat nahi hai, take away their right to vote, and take away their ability to hold property, immovable property. They can hold other forms of property. Neither real estate nor voting power should be available to them. They can work, they can earn, do everything else under the sun. That's the solution that's been given if Bangladesh doesn't take them back. And if this is the manner in which certain communities boycott wholesale, I think it's going to be a test of whether India is a soft state or not. And if communities can hold the state to ransom on these basic issues where it says that the sovereign state doesn't have the power to take a head count at all, then I will presume that you have something to hide and you're holding certain people or you're shielding certain people from state scrutiny. Then you would have established and vindicated my position that illegal migrants are getting support from certain quarters here through organized platforms, and there is a specific religious motivation to it. There I've said it, deal with it.
Just one point to add to this: there are punishments within the rules for not participating or not offering up information.
Okay, so Nikhil, now there are two questions from Siddharth Ravi Kumar that are directed to you. और जल्दी आंसर करने क्योंकि इतने क्वेश्चंस हैं कि मैं ही थक जाऊंगा पढ़ के. तो मगर I owe it to them. There are a lot of people watching this live. So Siddharth says, had the CAA also named Ahmadis and Rohingyas for argument's sake, would the CAA have been more legitimate in the eyes of the detractors? That is the first part. The second part is Buddhists are named in the CAA, but are in majority in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, where Hindus are arguably persecuted. Will the Buddhists from those countries not be benefiting from CAA? I think this is a misplaced question because the Sri Lanka is not covered in the CAA itself.
Just to Sri Lanka, let me add something. Your Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka are dealt with under a completely separate mechanism. So it is not as if they are excluded; they are dealt with under a separate mechanism.
Yeah, but what about the first question, Nikhil?
Can you repeat that again?
If the Ahmadiyas and Rohingyas...
This is for detractors to say, I am not a detractor of the CAA. I think it's an appalling perspective. I hope this is not how shallow the detraction is. I suspect the better thought out opponents of the CAA would not be satisfied merely because Rohingyas and Ahmadiyas are included.
Yeah. Okay. Now back to you, Sai. So I have to give you the compliment because the user has given you the compliment and I owe it to him. He said, did Sai have a vow to cut his hair and shave only when the temple cases were won? Sai Deepak. The nation wants to know.
No, not at all. The only thing is, after the weight loss, constantly my hair and weight became the subject of discussion on Twitter. And I was like, "ये क्या हो रहा है मैं शेव शोभा दे थोड़ी उनको जाओ डिस्कस कर लो." Speak of the content. चेहरा तो कुछ दिखने वाला नहीं है. Asian pages तो लगाने वाला नहीं हूँ मैं. This is how I'm going to look for the rest of my life. So I basically said, okay, I need to shed some weight also just to see. And since I was appearing in court on a regular basis, I got certain questions from judges saying, "Is this a new hairstyle?" So I said, before I will cut it off. That's a lot.
Okay, so now this is Sai. Pratik Wankhede has asked you this question. When you are talking about showing documents to prove you're from these three countries, and then he adds a comment, if I'm running for my life, will I ask them before fleeing Pakistan, Janab, mujhe certificate de do ki I'm fleeing?
Brilliant. ये सवाल ना, this is exactly the kind of armchair nonsense that I've been dealing with for quite some time, because इनको कुछ ये रेफ्यूजी वहां से जब भागते हैं, किस सिचुएशन में भागते हैं, किस लेवल की प्लानिंग करते हैं, कुछ समझ में नहीं आता है. Because when they apply for तीर्थ यात्रा visas, ये करते क्या होंगे फिर? When 90% of the people who come from Pakistan come through Tirth visas and they come and they settle here, they don't go back, तो क्या document दिखाते होंगे? Obviously, they'll be showing the Pakistani passport, right? In fact, MHA, when some of these people don't come through these visas and they don't have any passport also, so to speak, तो करते क्या है? Ration card या कुछ भी. They are not going to run to the Pakistan government and say एक सर्टिफिकेट इशू कर दो क्योंकि मुझे भारत भागना है. That's not what they're doing. उनके पास कुछ तो कागज होगा ये दिखाने के लिए that they are a resident of a certain place in Pakistan, something that has been issued by the local authorities at some point of time. उस कागज को लेके आ जाते हैं. And here's the important point: the Indian government, especially since 2014, has even accepted documents whose validity has expired so long as those documents were issued at some point by some authority in Pakistan. Okay. Second, इन लोगों को ना एक स्टेज पे ये कहा गया था कि इस पुलिस स्टेशन के ज्यूरिसडिक्शन के बाहर आप नहीं जाएंगे, आप यहीं पे रहेंगे. That made it difficult for them to find livelihoods, jobs. These some of them were even doctors who couldn't practice. कुछ नहीं हो रहा था. So organizations like Nimittikam constantly made representations to the MHA to say कुछ तो इनको छूट दे दो कि कहीं पे काम कर लो, लेकिन यहाँ पे आके हाजिरी देनी पड़ेगी हर एक हफ्ते या हर 2 महीने में आके, so that people are able to know कि आप कहाँ पे हैं. Traceability का एक रिक्वायरमेंट डाला गया था. That is what I'm saying. Everybody wants to comment on this issue without even asking. इतने दिन से जो वहां से शरणार्थी आए हैं, आदर्श नगर में दिल्ली में इतने सारे लोग बैठे हैं, क्या डॉक्यूमेंट्स इनसे पूछे गए थे, इन क्या दी गई थी, क्या फैसिलिटीज दी गई थी, ये सब किसी ने पूछा नहीं है. Nobody is bothered to ask what is the mechanism to even give them LTV or refugee status so far under the standard operating procedure of December 29, 2011. कैसे कैसे डॉक्यूमेंट्स दिए जाते हैं. So for instance, निखिल जी ने जो कहा था उत्तर प्रदेश ने ये दिया था, you know why? Because under the standard operating procedure, state governments are required to submit their own analysis of how many such let's say illegal migrants exist or refugees exist, and उनके security verification को IB के अलावा state level पे भी करके देते हैं. Why? Law and order is state subject. So ये जानना जरूरी होता है कि जो शरणार्थी के तौर पे भारत के किसी भी प्रदेश में बैठे हैं, उनके वजह से कहीं पे कोई लॉ एंड ऑर्डर इशू हुआ है कि नहीं. So that before they are given LTV or even the refugee status, there is a security verification that's undertaken. That is why the state's role is equally important. It's a state plus center that works under the standard operating procedure of 2011. So the question, speaking, see, the worst part is nobody is asking. आज तक जब शरणार्थी अंदर आ रहे थे उनसे क्या डॉक्यूमेंट्स पूछे जा रहे थे. So how do we know for a fact that a Rohingya is indeed a Rohingya who's persecuted? Why are these questions being limited only to Pakistani Hindus? Rohingya के बारे में कोई ये सवाल पूछा नहीं, Tibet के बारे में पूछा नहीं. Can any Indian who can't even seem to have the knowledge to distinguish between a member of the Northeast community and Chinese distinguish between a Tibetan and a Han Chinese? उतनी बुद्धि है हमें. तो लेकिन Tibetans को हमने इतना सब कुछ कर दिया, उनको हमने यहाँ पे धर्मशाला में पूरा धर्मशाला बना के दे रखा है, right? So questions which have never been asked with respect to Tibetans or with Rohingyas, 40,000 people are sitting around the cantonment in Jammu, we are now asking with respect to Pakistani Hindus. यार ये तो हद हो गई. Yeah, it's interesting. So, all these questions are coming now.
So Nikhil, question for you: why are atheists and Jews not included? I'm an Assamese and my identity is under threat. Shouldn't the government exempt Brahmaputra Valley from the ambit of CAA? So I don't know what the first part has got to do with the second part, but I guess they've asked both the questions.
You know, Kushal, I don't think atheists are a recognized group constitutionally for us. They would fall under people like you, for example, would fall under Hindu, even though you may want to say that you're Nastik and this and that. Tough luck. You're a Hindu for the purposes of the state. So an atheist is actually very easily accommodated when it comes to our constitutional structures. As to why are Jews excluded? Because this is not a natural homeland for Jews. I think that's the simple answer.
Okay.
That's how we look at it.
So one more, I didn't get this question. So explain this to me, Nikhil. So they say my question to all three of you, I guess, but Nikhil, you take it because there are few other questions too. Which error is more tolerable, an illegal person getting the citizenship or a genuine citizen left out? That's actually a good question.
An illegal person getting citizenship, I would say the more tolerable is an illegal person getting citizenship.
Sai, what are your views on this? Because it was for all three of us.
सवाल को थोड़ा repeat कीजिए, please.
Which error is more tolerable, an illegal getting the citizenship or a genuine citizen left out related to
NRC? Presumption of innocence type का सवाल है
यार. Which is more tolerable? Frankly, someone at the very least who's a citizen Pakistan's exempted. I don't think it's tolerable. Whether it's a Hindu or a Muslim, frankly, jiska ghar hai usko beghar karna, it's even more problematic.
So an illegal person getting it is better option than a valid citizen being excluded.
Correct.
Yeah. So one question for Sai Deepak, and these are genuine concerns, Sai, and I also agree with it, that Bangladeshi Muslims illegally living in India are now converting to Christianity to gain citizenship through CAA, hoping that they would get it. Should that be allowed? How do we curb it?
So that's precisely why in the opening remark I pointed out how Muslims in Afghanistan and Pakistan are converting to Christianity to get access under the CAA. Okay, so this is where I think the rules, in fact, as part of the one of the opening debates also I had said that they need to ask themselves, how are they going to verify that agents of the ISI or anybody else don't enter this country as persecuted minorities of a certain group? Okay. That, frankly speaking, I think is a question for the security agencies to answer. Because going by that particular logic, that question applies not just to CAA, it applies even otherwise to anyone who wants to come to India, right? अगर CAA नहीं भी होता और कोई भारत में आके कहता मुझे भारत में ना यहाँ का सिटीजन बनना है, मैं पाकिस्तान से हूँ, I may be a Muslim, I'm willing to live here for 12 years, that is a question that the state would have had to answer with or without the CAA. It's not as if it's a question that needs to be answered with respect to the CAA specifically. What is it that the CAA presumes? That if you're a member of a community of these 6 communities from these 3 states, I presume that you're a persecuted minority. That's it. Okay. उसके अलावा जितने भी security requirements हैं, that will apply to both parties according to me. In fact, to answer Nikhil ji's one primary concern, if security considerations are effectively diluted for beneficiaries of the CAA, endangering the security of India, and those conditions are applied only to people who are non-CAA beneficiaries, then that would be a serious problem with respect to the rules, because there is no justification for reducing security checks at all under any circumstances. आप बाहर के आदमी के लिए घर के आदमी के security को तो आप दाव पे नहीं लगा सकते. That's a basic position. Okay.
Kushal, short answer to the question that you just raised is that these are people, if they're converting to Christianity to enter, they have not suffered religious persecution. End of story.
I think
they've been Muslims all their life.
Not only that, at a very social level, I think it's also the failure of the Hindu society. I'm just being very honest that if they are going somewhere, the question that needs to be asked is what is happening. And I just want to make an intervention. It has nothing to do with the debate. There are few people in the live stream who are making bullshit statements about anyone who's speaking. I purposely put that tweet on the screen and I blocked that user. Look, this is a place for civilized debate. If you can't be civilized and you come on my podcast and behave in an uncivilized manner, I will block you. So that so in case you think why did I put it on the screen, is I just want to make this point. And if you can't be civilized, don't come and view my channel. Don't come on my live stream because I will block you. No, I blocked it and I'll share it later on. But calling somebody names and abusing somebody just because you don't like their views. So then people.
It's all directed at me. Yeah, it's the Hindutva-vadis are not happy with me today. It's all directed at me.
Yeah. The kind of BS that I've taken since the CA video, I think I know where this is coming from. I'm used to it. Jamia mein to mil gaya tha. Yeah.
I can't take it. No, I can't take it. I purposely put it on the screen to make it a documented thing that why I blocked someone, and I'm making a case out here and I'm referring it on the live discussion. You do it one more time on my discussion, I will block you happily. You cannot insult guests on my live chat. And if you don't like how I do things, you don't have to watch this podcast or this show at all, because I will give a voice to people. And I am very grateful to both these people who are extremely erudite and very good thinkers. So please stop doing it. And this is
anyone to oppose the CA and NRC should sit at the feet of Nikhil ji and learn how a debate is supposed to be conducted and what kind of depth you need to actually oppose it. Okay, because I say this only for a different reason, that I have heard nothing but unimaginative, predictable tropes and stereotypes. This is for the first time. I am glad that I'm responding to certain points made by Nikhil ji. So this is the way you're supposed to respond. अगर आप ये कर नहीं पाते हैं, then frankly you're only giving expression to impotent rage. I can't help that.
Yeah, he's being too kind to me, man. I don't know what to say to Sai. He was way too nice to me.
No. Frankly, this shows that people who come from the non-left background, जब कोई issue लेते हैं, this is the depth to which you're supposed to go and you're supposed to address. Unfortunately, that's not been the case at all. Every discussion that I've had has been so shallow and superficial that I've been like, come on, at least give me a different argument to meet with.
You know, the worst argument is the 14 argument on under-inclusion. Why has Myanmar not been included? Why? ये कोई argument है यार? It won't last 2 seconds in court.
मतलब ऑक्सफोर्ड से पढ़े लिखे रोड स्कॉलर्स भी यही अंडर इंक्लूजन का आर्गुमेंट दिए जा रहे हैं भाई आर्टिकल
Why are you being nasty?
Okay, Nikhil, one last question for you, and then I leave. The last question will be for you. Pratham has asked this question for persecuted. So actually, there are persecuted minorities who have come illegally after 2014. They will be considered illegal immigrants by law and face its legal consequences. It's a question to you.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't quite get that. I didn't see the question in it.
मुझे ही नहीं समझ पड़ रहा था. For persecuted minorities who have come illegally after 2014, will they be considered illegal immigrants by law and face its legal consequences?
Yes. Simply put, yes.
Yeah, so it's a yes.
This is why, let me be clear. To me, the most appalling thing about the CAA is this date cutoff. Yeah, this persecution doesn't end. So if you have passed this law by a civilizational intent, then why have you put a backstop?
Yep, I agree. And one last comment from a dear friend of mine. I'm not going to name his full name, so I'm just going to say this is what a dear friend of mine, Reem, has said. It's a comment. He says, all are Indians. Merely for being born to a Muslim family, even atheist, I think he's talking about himself. Now, am I suspect of civilizational loyalty to Bharat? Is this my new original sin? What is my test to prove my loyalty? I can tell you the man is one of the finest people I've met in my life. He's like a brother. So this is a genuine question that should be addressed by all three of us, that in the cacophony of noises and in the political, and let's start with Sai so that we can wrap things up. In the political mudslinging, at many times, Sai, there are genuine allies. Now, the man who has asked this question, I can tell you, is a genuine ally, a genuine person, a good human being, a proud Indian, far more of a proud Indian than mere jaisa besharam, let me tell you. So now, what do we do with that situation? How can we create a space? And this is a larger space where how can we create a space so that we can have these disagreements and not attribute, motivations to other people?
So, because I think here there's a decent chance that what I say may offend him. I don't know. I'll leave it to him. If there is something called as an Indian version of Islam, I'm not willing to extend that benefit of the doubt to Pakistani Muslims or to Bangladeshi Muslims as someone who continues to witness what is happening there and watches closely what's happening to non-Muslim communities, especially the Hindus of Pakistan and Bangladesh. Okay, so if we are being told that we must treat Indian Muslims, or let's say other Muslims coming from other radicalized parts of the world, at par with Indian Muslims, I think it is a huge disservice to the brand of Islam as it exists today or as it's practiced today, according to what they claim. Okay.
Just so the record, the person asking this question is a hardcore atheist.
Fair enough, no problem. Even if, but he is effectively looking at it not from the standpoint of an atheist, but as someone who comes from a Muslim family. So he is basically wondering whether he is guilty by association because he comes from an Indian Muslim family. Frankly, that is also going against the accepting nature of the Indian society, because when you raise these questions, you're effectively raising questions about the very people that you interact with on a daily basis, who absolutely have no problems with interacting with you or transacting with you at any level. So judge this entire society at the very least on the basis of what you encounter on a day-to-day basis. If so far your Muslim identity has not come in the way of interactions or opportunities or whatever it may be, I don't see why you get to actually hold the card of the victim under any circumstances. Don't let the CAA NRC debate effectively alienate you from the Indian mainstream at the very least, because the problem is that there's a primary opposition with respect to people coming from those countries who have a history of persecuting non-Muslims. If you don't share that particular history and you don't believe in that form of persecution, you really have no reason to feel cut off from India's civilizational identity, period.
Fair enough. Nikhil, I want you to respond to this too.
My short comment is that in our civilizational ethos, we don't persecute conscience. We don't persecute ideas. We persecute actions. If your actions are against us, we will certainly take note of that fact. But if you're worried that because you have certain ideas and certain notions that you want to say out loud, there is no space in my understanding of this country's ethos for that to be persecuted. But having said that, we have, in the pursuit of acquiring control, in a bipartisan display of legislative idiocy, passed a number of laws that can harm a lot of people and their conscience. And that's something that disappoints. It's something you and I both have discussed quite often, Kushal. But the short point is simple, that we don't persecute conscience, we only persecute malactions.
I think that's a very good way. So before we wrap up the discussion, I first of all want to take this opportunity. So people usually say, "Are Kushal, how do you host such long discussions?" Just for the record, today has been the longest discussion ever hosted on this podcast. And by the way, we have the highest viewership ever on this podcast for this discussion. So to all those people, first of all, who always say, "Kushal, tum bahut lambe discussion karte ho," well, then see, it has been the longest ever discussion and we've had the highest viewership ever. Now, first of all, I want to thank Sai Deepak and Nikhil for coming and having this discussion, because I certainly am not good enough to give an answer, but I will leave everyone with my comments. But before I leave everyone with my comments, which I do on every Shastrartha, I want to first take this opportunity to thank both of you guys. Thanks a lot for coming and having this discussion over here.
No problem. This was a lot of fun.
All right, guys. So this is, now I have removed my inner leftist and now this is me talking to all of you. So this is my answer on the whole CAA NRC conundrum. Like I said, I am not a lawyer. I am a chota mota tucha philosopher. I look at things purely from a philosophical perspective. When I saw CAA and NRC, now I'll be very honest, I am opposed to NRC even right now. Not because of any of the reasons the left has raised. My opposition to the NRC is because I know the Indian state very well. The Indian state has the capacity of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. The Indian state is incapable of handling things the way it does. And I believe the NRC is a bad idea. It will leave many lives lost. As a person who has worked in scheduled caste, scheduled tribe villages, I can tell you NRC could create possible problems for a lot of tribal Hindus, which I'm very worried about. But then Sai and Nikhil can come back to me and say, but agar laws hi nahi malum to tum presume kyun kar rahe ho? Mera presumption sirf itna hai ki my presumption is that in a country with limited state capacity, I think NRC is too big an exercise to be tried out. हाँ, NPR चल रहा है, तुम्हारा population census चल रहा है, वो करो. The second criticism is I hate the CAA that the government has gotten. This is where the identity of India comes into the issue. See, civilizations are not built in vacuums. Civilizations are not built on blank slates. Secularism at a conceptual level is a blank slate. No state ever that has been in the history of democracy is a blank slate. If America was a blank slate, then why are eating dogs a problem? If America is a blank slate, then why can't you hunt the American eagle? If Pakistan is a blank slate, why are there certain restrictions on certain things? I'm just using examples. Israel is not a blank slate. At least it's very clear about it. So the whole concept that the left always brings, that we are a secular state, has to be the most bogus concept ever in the history of the human race. Individuals can't be secular. Even the state, till a certain extent, can be secular, but there will always be civilizational natures. There is a civilizational nature in India. If there was no civilizational nature of India, we would not have the directive principles which talk about cattle, hunting cattle or eating cattle, because the constitution and the directive principles did take the civilizational nature into consideration. I am of a very clear opinion that the CAA has to be changed and India should unequivocally, and I say that with no shame, unequivocally say that it is the natural homeland of Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs, till some extent even Parsis, and yes, atheists too. Because these are philosophies that have been born in this land. If anybody tells me atheism is not Indian, well, you need to read more. Because the first atheists in the world were also Indian. The first ever atheistic school was Indian. We have to take care of these people if they are persecuted. Yes, another genuine criticism is I think it's ridiculous to say that India keeps dilly-dallying around about not having a consistent refugee policy. I think it is time we start having that discussion in India, that we should actually have a standardized refugee policy. And that refugee policy has to be based on the principles of mutual respect, reciprocity, and ahimsa. Anybody who does not believe in these principles is not welcome in this country. And yes, Karl Popper's paradox of intolerance or tolerance, whatever you want to call it, is valid. Yes, there is a valid case to be made. We cannot tolerate the intolerant. So do not tell me that the people who are persecuting Hindus in Pakistan should have the right to get citizenship in India. They do not have any right to get citizenship in India. You can, I mean, I can use parliamentary, non-parliamentary language in my podcast. You can just kiss my ass if that's what you believe it is. Literally, you can kiss my ass. I do not believe in that argument. You cannot say that a Muslim and a Hindu in Pakistan are at the same pedestal. If you were to give me the case of the Ahmadiyya, I'm still open and I'm listening to you. I am going to have a sympathetic ear there. But you cannot tell me that the persecution of a Hindu and a Christian and a Sikh and an atheist in Pakistan. In fact, let me tell you, the atheists are as badly treated in Pakistan, if not worse, than a Hindu. I can tell you stories of atheists जिनके शरीर पे cigarette butt से तौबा तौबा लिखा गया हुआ है. I know that for real. How? Because I contributed some money to take an atheist out of Pakistan. We need to address these issues in India. We need to have these discussions. And one last word. Everybody is not going to agree with your version of CAA or NRC. My aim through this exercise is not to make people agree with everyone or, get this homogeneity. I think if we became a homogeneous society, it would be a terrible society to live in. Because the very nature of a Hindu society was our inherent plurality. Whereas Sai Deepak, who is a devout Hindu, or a Nikhil, who is a semi-devout Hindu, I'm speaking for Nikhil because I know him for a while now and we talk a lot, or a complete materialist like me can sit together and have a civilized conversation. That is the Hindu way. That is the Indian way. And if we are going to become like morons who are going to shout at each other on a daily basis, well, I'm sorry, that is not the Indian way. And I wish that the non-left had more voices like a Sai Deepak and the Nikhil Mehras over here. Because we don't have it, we have a paucity of voices. And then we say, Are tu aisa. Stop being like that. The CAA NRC is a very complicated subject, and to say it is simplistic itself is a lie. As you saw by today's discussion, that we are actually shooting in the dark because we don't know the papers from the government and in a very significant way. But having said that, we can all have our disagreements, but always remember, I always say on this podcast, and I'll end it with that, मतभेद अच्छा है, मनभेद मत रखो. मनभेद से झगड़ा करो, मतभेद से मत करो. मतभेद तो बहुत अच्छी चीज है. Anyways, let's wrap things up. Just one last word, that tomorrow I'll have my monologue where I'll introduce a new concept which I've always spoken about but never elaborated. I'm going to explain what I mean by the no true translation fallacy. So if you like it, you can join in tomorrow 9 p.m. and chat with me. If you like what I'm doing over here, you can become a member on the YouTube channel, or you can go to patreon.com/Cārvāka and become a patron there. I hope the discussion was to your satisfaction, because we've almost clocked 2.5 hours. And I'll see you next time. Namaste. Take care. Goodbye.